Hi guys, welcome back to another exciting video, so sit back, relax, and let's get started. Izuku's life hadn't been an easy one, but it was one he managed to overcome, and with a lot of hard work and determination he was able to achieve his very goal. The heroes of his world were all gone, and all by his hand. You thought his goal was to be a hero, maybe at one point in his miserable life, but he has long since grown up from such a childish dream. Besides, after a certain encounter with a certain hero, he was told that such a goal wasn't realistic, so he decided to do the most realistic thing he could think of. That wasn't killing himself. He became something the heroes feared. He went to the villains with his notebooks and was welcomed with open arms. He gained the trust of his successor, All For One, in the League of Villains. As a result, he became so loved by All For One that All For One wanted to make Izuku his successor instead of Tamura. But there was one tiny problem. Tamura will be upset. You see, he'll be volatile. Get rid of him, he's no longer needed. So Izuku did no hesitation, despite Tamura showing Izuku some kindness in this cruel world. Izuku didn't hesitate to stab Tamura roughly 20 times. When they were alone, he just felt nothing anymore. He didn't cry or anything. Once he was done, he returned to All For One. Then he and All For One were one. It took a long time, nearly 2 years, but he inherited All For One. It wasn't easy. Oh no, it was a painful process that turned his lovely green locks a stark white. One by one the heroes fell by his hands, as he had every quirk he could possibly want at his fingertips. It was like watching dominoes fall. Izuku wasn't completely heartless. No, had some room in his cold heart for two people. The first was Eri. The poor girl was hurting and reminded him so much of himself that he just had to take her, and ripped her right from the Yakuza, right out of Overhaul's arms, as he used Overhaul's own quirk on him to make the man into nothing but a BLD splatter. The second person was someone recent, but we'll get into them later. At first, he had everything he could ever dream of. He was their symbol of fear. He had All For One and One For All to his own, and try as they might, the heroes still tried to stop him. He stomped them all to dust beneath his thumb. Then came the problem. He found himself having Izuku found himself growing rather bored. Here he was, 30 years old, with nothing to hurt, nothing to kill. The HPSC fell by his hand, and the heroes, what remained anyways, scattered to the winds. His throne. Japan was in shambles. Izuku had it all, and now he was bored. Now came his second person to warm their way into his heart, not because he felt for them, but because he could use them. Seer. He spoke to his little seer from his throne in UAS auditorium. Izuku's many henchmen scattered about doing something. Izuku looked at his little seer. He didn't know this woman's full name, and he didn't really care about that. He just referred to her as Seer, and she listened. She was just a woman who came to him seeking sanctuary and safety. Izuku turned her away. But then she told him about her quirk, her ability to see past this realm and into others, and that intrigued Izuku. He loved her quirk, but he couldn't take it for himself. There was something wrong with it, as it didn't work for him, and that was fine. Yes, my lord, she whispered as she stepped up to him. His pretty little seer didn't like to be seen. Ironically enough, she always kept herself hidden under hoods and cloaks. Today she chose a cloak to hide her face and body. I want to see what another me is doing right now, he said boredly. Yes, my lord. Her quirk was so interesting, her eyes would glow, and it was like a projection would play right in front of Izuku. You see, once Izuku learned of this ability, he immediately wanted to see what other Izukus were doing, because surely they would all be like him, right? Wrong. He learned that the other Izukus were much different from him. Most, but not all, were actually handed One For All, a quirk he had to kill Shoto Todoroki to get his hands on. And kill Shoto Todoroki he did. Izuku ripped the fool clean in half right in front of Endeavor. It left Endeavor a sobbing mess, and an easy kill for Dabai. Izuku popped a cigarette in his mouth and lit it with the tip of his finger. Another gift from Shoto Todoroki, half hot and half ice, one that Izuku didn't plan on giving up anytime soon. Anyone in particular, my lord? Perhaps you'd like to watch the you that became a vigilante again, Seer suggested. Izuku took a deep drag of his cigarette. No, tell me, are there any my age yet? Seer shut her eyes as she activated her quirk. No, sir. Pity. Izuku exhaled. Very well. Give me someone like me, someone who has All For One and One For All. I'm interested in that. All right. She shut her eyes again, and her eyes closed yet again. Izuku spotted white and turned to see Eri, now almost 18 years of age, coming down to the throne room. Sweetheart, he greeted her fondly. Eri gave him a smile. Hello, Dad, she greeted him in return as she approached. What are you doing? I'm going to watch what the other Izukus are doing today, he would tell her as he scooted over in his throne and patted it. Come and join me. Eri did, and she sat next to him as the seer finished looking through the many realms. I found one that may interest you, she said as her quirk activated. Dad? Eri asked as the projection played in front of them. It was another him. Obviously one that apparently had both All For One and One For All as he requested, but that couldn't be right. Thighs him had his normal green hair. Yes, sweetheart? He asked as he watched this other him go along his day without a care in the world. Do you like to watch the other Izukus because you wish for their life? She asked softly. If it were anyone else to ask such an outrageous question, they would be met with a backhand. But this was Eri. Izuku gently runs his fingers through her silky hair instead. Silly. Eri, he could only kuno I watch them because I know I can kill them, Izuku whispered to her. It's like watching a deer before hunting it, he mused as he watched the Izuku go about his day without realizing that he's being watched. There's no sound unfortunately, but that was fine. He watched as this Izuku was buying some food and talking to a purple-haired boy, Hitoshi. Right, Hitoshi Shinzu. The boy that the HPSC used as a double agent to get close to Izuku, that's right. The boy Izuku silenced by ripping his tongue out. That stupid brainwashing quirk got Izuku under. Izuku was able to break out obviously and wasn't too happy, so he removed the boy's tongue. You two appear to be close, my lord, Seer observed, and Izuku could only nod as he watched the two of them interact. And at one point hug. Seer, I thought I said I wanted someone with both all for one and one for all. Izuku felt rather bored as he watched this rather boring interaction. Yes, my visions never lie. Izuku hummed as he watched the two boys chat excitedly about something when who shows up? Shoto Todoroki. That's who. The boy comes up and has the gall to kiss this Izuku's cheek. This Izuku opened his mouth and fake gagged himself at the display. But then he saw it. The other Izuku's eyes went from green to red as he spoke while looking at Shoto. Now that's interesting, he admitted and sat up in interest to it again. He demanded softly, what was that? What are you? He asked. You're not like me, that much is sure. Sure enough, those green eyes turned red as his facial expression changed, and his tone seemed to change as well. Then his hair changed. It went from curly to straight and then from green to white. The whole air about him changed, and finally it hit Izuku. What this younger him had. Ascension quirk. He gasped. Ascension all for one quirk. It has to be, or something similar. How interesting. Izuku leaned in and then tapped his fingers happily against his throne, and then he stood. You see, Rybear. He started, even though Eri didn't ask. I have important and powerful people working non-stop, so I may be able to travel to these other worlds. Why would you want to do that? Eri asked as she sat up in alarm. That sounds dangerous. Yes, it is dangerous. Izuku smiled. You see, my dear, I've grown bored, Izuku explained and put one hand behind his back. I am a man who now has everything, and it's just not enough. A truly devastating tale. Once Seer came to me and showed me the other lives I've lived. I realized I want to rip their lives from them. I want to do it all over again, only this time stronger. I want to destroy their worlds the way I've claimed mine. He smiled at his daughter. I will never be satisfied until every world bows to me. Eri walked up and put her hand on his shoulder. What are you going to do to achieve your goal? Izuku smiled. Come, I'll show you what I've been working on, he said, and offered his hand, and she took it. He led her from his throne room and down the hallways that were once the Grand School of UA. The hallways were destroyed with doors broken, signs ripped off over the years. The walls have become dusty and grimy as cobwebs hang off of the ceiling. Izuku grinned at the sight before him. A few of Izuku's servants made great pains to bow to him as he passed. Finally, they came upon the one room that still stayed the same, the room that supported the course used to invent items. Only one person from UA remained and even stayed faithful to Izuku, though it was clear that it wasn't what she thought her life was going to be. Izuku walked into the room where Hatsum and a few other inventors were busy working. Hatsum paused her work and lifted her goggles to look at Izuku and Eri. She gave a slight bow to them. You'll be happy to know that we should have this baby up and running in a few days' time, she said as she tapped her wrench against the giant machine. The machine that will make all of Izuku's dreams come true in just a few days' time. Another inventor stepped up, Eddie Soul, the man Izuku saved from Humorize only to use for his own purpose. Eddie Soul resisted and begged, but Izuku made him a deal. Eddie Soul would come with him, and so would his family. The Soul children knew to stay clear of Izuku's way should the time come. As his eldest, Rody did try to escape with his siblings, but Izuku brought them back with ease. Upon seeing just how powerful Izuku was, Rody learned not to test Izuku's patience still. Rody was fast and nimble, something Izuku thought about using for himself. He just didn't know how yet. Yes, we'll run a few test runs before sending you through, of course. We can't have you ripping in half, Eddie said softly while bowing. Good, Izuku said and looked at the machine. There were knobs and buttons aplenty. Hatsum stepped up to Izuku and grinned at him. The only button you need to worry about, sir, is this big red one. She pointed to the big red button. This is the power button. Sir, another inventor, Izuku forgot his name, stepped up. We're going to need a room bigger than this for testing. Izuku waved his hand. You can use the auditorium should you need to. I'll have people help you move it when it's ready. Yes, sir, but they should be warned that they need to be gentle. Some of the things we have in this machine require delicacy. Izuku only nodded. Of course, just keep on building. I'll be waiting. Eri. Come, Izuku demanded as he walked out of the room, and Eri followed suit. So you're leaving us? Eri inquired. For a while. But don't worry, they're working on a way back for me as well as a way in. Let's hope everything goes according to plan. I almost can't remember the last time I was this hopeful. The test run was successful still. Izuku wanted to cover all bases before the real fun began. He got someone. A person with a quirk similar to that of deceased Night Eye, a person who could see far into the future. The man, whose name wasn't important, simply plucked one of Izuku's hairs and held it. Then his eyes began to glow. Well, Izuku asked after several seconds, what do you see? The future seer looked up to the ceiling as his eyes glowed a bright green. Two born without quirks. 1 reborn again, 2 given a great power made to stop an ancient evil, 1 split in 2 born with the ability of yours, and 1 born with the ability to heal as well as to kill, all powerful in their own ways and abilities, all ready to defend and fight. They won't make this easy for you. My lord, I'm afraid 1 will die by your hand. While 1 will stop being afraid, all will rise to the occasion. Those thought to be your friends will betray you. The man let out a gasp as his vision came to an end, and he took several steps back. He sucked in several breaths before he fell to his knees. That is all the visions will allow me to see. I'm sorry. Izuku stared at the man for several long seconds before sighing. 2 born without quirks, 1 reborn again, 2 given a great power that was made to stop an ancient evil, 1 split in 2 with the ability of yours, and 1 born with the ability to heal as to kill, he repeated softly while tapping his throne while looking at the great machine. His eyes stayed cold as he watched the machine, and then he stood. I have an inkling as to what that all could mean, and know what I hope it's correct. They stepped up to him swiftly. Here she presented him a watch. But not just any watch, it's connected to the machine should you wish to return. All you have to do is press this button here, she told him as she showed him the small button on the end. Now, this baby is in its infancy, so please be careful with it. Can I travel between dimensions with it? He inquired softly. I will call you when such a watch is ready. For now, this baby can take my calls and it can only bring you home. We're working on a watch that will allow you to travel between places, she whispered softly, and he nodded. Very well. He inspected the watch. It looked like a fitness watch with an extra button on the side. Turn on the machine. I'm growing quite bored, he ordered, and the workers scrambled to get the machine up and running. Per his request, Izuku strapped the watch to his wrist. The machine whirled to life as levels were pushed and buttons were pressed. Izuku looked at the machine and grinned as the 2 ends sparked to life. First it started as bright blue sparks before the sparks turned to coils before the portal suddenly opened up. The portal was so bright that it lit up the whole room. It was like a mini-sun as the temperature rose and made several people start to sweat. Look at you. Izuku grinned and walked up to the portal just to be sure this isn't an assassination attempt, he muttered and plucked a hair from his head. Yes, they had done a test run, but those could be faked, and he wasn't taking any risks. He plucked a curly hair from his head and reached out towards the portal before he let go of the hair. The hair flew through the portal and was sucked away. With this vortex it worked. I'll be back for that watch, he told them before he stepped up to the bright portal. The wind was powerful the closer he got as his clothes moved towards it and his feet were starting to slip. But he held his ground for just a moment, then jumped. Izuku leapt high in the air, and with a high-pitched laugh he was dragged through the portal. Prepare yourselves. Whoever you all may be, I'm going to claim what's mine, he thought with glee before he passed through the portal, unaware of the ripple effect that he caused, or maybe he was aware. It's hard to say for sure. The effect that brought together 7, maybe 8 if you counted a quirk. Unlikely people together, those people himself but different. For Izuku, Aizawa life has been interesting to say the least. First he was thought to be quirkless as he had no memories of the first 4 years of his life, but still he was taken in and loved by Shouta Aizawa. But him being quirkless turned out to be a lie. Turns out his brother, well technically Hitoshi, was Izuku's nephew, but that was a conversation for another day. Hitoshi Aizawa had been erasing Izuku's memories to keep a part of him hidden away from the world, that part of him that Hitoshi was so afraid of. Izuku's real quirk ascension, all for 1 quirk that goes by the name of Kyujo, yes, named after the rabid dog. He liked the name so it stuck, a quirk that Izuku has actually grown fond of over the year and a half that Kyujo was finally allowed to flourish instead of being stifled down. It wasn't easy at first. Kyujo was volatile and aggressive towards anyone and everyone in his path. But thanks to Shouta, Shoto, and Izuku, Kyujo has calmed down a bit, not a lot, but enough at least. He stopped biting people he didn't like. Unfortunately, due to his abuse, Hitoshi and Izuku's relationship wasn't as tight as it once was, and maybe that was okay. They were still brothers, tried and true, but their relationship absolutely took a hit. They were working it out in therapy still. It would be a long while until they ever overcome the hurdle that Hitoshi created. Still, it wasn't a lonely life. Far from it. Izuku had a boyfriend. Surprising himself, he figured most would stay far away from Kyujo, but Shoto Todoroki seemed enamored by Kyujo. If anything, Kyujo never scared him, not once. That's not to say the rest of class 2 welcomed Kyujo open arms the way Shoto had known. It took a good while before the class fully warmed up to Kyujo. Once they finally learned he was no threat despite his attitude and their shared abilities to take quirks. All in all, it was interesting, and every day was a new experience for Izuku and Kyujo alike. Izuku was currently standing in the main bathroom and getting ready to brush his teeth for the night. He was exhausted after a long day of training with both his adoptive father and All Might, working to control One for All. With All Might, he was almost at 50% power, and he's learned how to control Black Whip as well as Smoke Screen on top of Super Strength and Float. And doing quirkless sparring with his father, Izuku put toothpaste on his toothbrush and ran it underwater. It was when he was trying to put the toothbrush to his mouth that there was an issue as his arm delayed. Kyujo Oh right, because of Hitoshi's brainwashing. Kyujo was a little behind in development. It was widely speculated that Kyujo was still 5 years old, well 6 years now, despite looking like Izuku. Izuku looked at himself in the mirror. What's the issue? He asked his reflection, and his eyes turned red as Kyujo chimed in. When talking, Kyujo will just take control of Izuku's eyes. But when Kyujo wishes for full control over Izuku's body, Izuku's hair will turn white and straight. I don't like the flavor, Kyujo admitted, and Izuku sighed tiredly. It's just cinnamon. Whoever thought of such a disgusting flavor needs to be thrown into the sun. Also, so should Kaken for buying such toothpaste for everyone. Okay, I think there's a mint toothpaste around here somewhere, Izuku sighed as he took the cinnamon toothpaste off of his toothbrush and looked around for a minty toothpaste. He couldn't find any. Instead, he found a bubble gum. What child is out here with bubble gum flavor? Denki. It's Denki's. Izuku shook his head. I hope he doesn't mind, he mumbled as he put a little on his toothbrush and ran it under water. He then put the toothpaste back where he found it and started to brush his teeth with it. Well, it turns out the children's toothpaste was growing on Kyujo as he liked the taste a lot better. Don't. Izuku stopped brushing and pointed his foaming toothbrush at the mirror. Swallow, he demanded of his quirk. That's the first time I'm hearing that you know as a guy and all, Denki said with a grin as he walked into the bathroom, and Izuku rolled his eyes. I borrowed your toothpaste. Kyujo doesn't like the cinnamon stuff Bakugo got, Izuku said, and Denki shrugged. Denki was one of Izuku's first ever friends outside of Hitoshi. Denki was also dating Hitoshi, but that was also a story for another day. I think is going shopping tomorrow. Ask him to pick up toothpaste provided you have the money. Izuku nodded. Thanks. I will, he said, and spat in the sink. He then washed the sink out. What are you thinking, Kyujo? Spearmint. Izuku looked into the mirror and Kyujo popped out but didn't speak. Instead, he just stood there staring. Kyujo. Bubble gum, yeah. Izuku should have seen that coming. Fine. Izuku relented and he left the bathroom as Denki started to brush his teeth to get ready for bed. Izuku waved to a couple of his fellow classmates as he walked up the steps to his dorm room. Hitchin. He greeted his brother who was standing outside of his own dorm room. Oh, hey Zuchin, Kyujo. Toshichin. Kyujo greeted Hitoshi back. What are you doing? Izuku asked, and Hitoshi gave a little shrug. Waiting on Denki, Hitoshi admitted with a yawn. You getting ready for bed? It's been a long day and I need some rest, he admitted, and Hitoshi nodded. Yeah, double training between Dad and All Might would take a lot out of anyone. I know. I gotta train with Dad tomorrow. Gotta get ready for my license exam. Hitoshi had missed 2 weeks of hero training due to his mental health. He tried the remake, but the children were too afraid of him. So now he has to try again with the new one. In a week. You got this. You'll get it this time. I'm sure of it. The two of them slapped hands and Hitoshi pulled him into a hug. Yeah, hopefully it's not kids again. Hitoshi shook his head at the memory. Regardless, they separated and Izuku walked towards his room. I need sleep. Good night, Hitchin. Night, Zuchin, Kyujo. Good night, Toshichin. With that, Izuku walked off to his room. He made it to his dorm and unlocked the door. Shoto, what are you doing here? Izuku asked as he shut the door. Shoto gave a half shrug. Couldn't sleep, he admitted as he was laying in Izuku's bed already stripped down into his PJs, his clothes neatly folded in a pile on the floor. Pretty. Izuku smiled at Kyujo's remark. I'll join you in a minute. Izuku started to strip out of his gym uniform and take his undercut out of its ponytail. They were comfortable around one another. To strip down, Izuku threw his dirty clothes in the hamper and put on a tank top and a pair of red boxers. Once he was in sleeping clothes, he snuggled up close to Shoto under the covers. Shoto touched him with his left hand and he felt warm. The both of them got comfortable. But still, consent was instilled in both Kyujo and Izuku. Is this okay? Izuku whispered, and Shoto rested his head on Izuku's chest before nodding. Izuku put an arm around Shoto before turning the light out. Good night, Shoto. Good night, Izuku. Kyujo. Kyujo didn't answer this time as he just floated by and watched for a few seconds. Kyujo would stay on watch probably for the whole night. He always did. Izuku learned it was the reason why Kyujo wasn't much of a morning person, because he was almost always on guard during the night usually. Izuku tried to get Kyujo to lay down for the night, but the quirk never would. Not after the incident with Tamura sneaking in and cuddling with Izuku while Izuku slept. That was a scary night that Izuku longed to forget. That and the fiasco at the HPSC facility they really didn't want to think about right now. Izuku and Shoto wouldn't get much sleep that night. Unfortunately, truth be told, nobody would. It had happened so suddenly. One moment Izuku and Shoto were asleep, then next the world would shake and a bright light would engulf them. The light was so bright it was like the sun was right there. It woke everyone up with a gasp. Both Izuku and Shoto shot up at the brightness that made them squint their eyes and turn away. What the hell is that? Izuku gasped as Shoto tried to close the blinds, but it did no good. The earth shook beneath them and instantly they were on their feet. The sounds of hurried feet told both of them that they weren't the only one. Earthquake. Ada screamed as he pounded on Izuku's door. Hurry. We need to get outside. Ada yelled and tried to open Izuku's door, but it was locked. Other me, it's not an earthquake. An attack. Izuku inquired to Kyujo as he and Shoto quickly ran out of Izuku's room. Clothes be damned, yeah. Izuku was in a tank and boxers, and Shoto in his PJs, but it didn't matter at the moment. You don't know, I just know that it's not an earthquake, Kyujo admitted softly. Izuku spotted Denki and Hitoshi running out hand in hand down the hallway as the world continued to shake beneath their feet. Hitoshi was like him, only he was in a big t-shirt and the t-shirt hid his boxers. Others were running as well and he spotted Mina and Takoyami running down the steps. Izuku hurried down the steps and grabbed Shoto's hand to make sure his boyfriend was steady. When they ran outside, Izuku squinted against the ungodly bright light that was outside. Thankfully, Shoto was able to lead towards the others. What is that? Hyujo gasped in Izuku's mind. It made Izuku have to look towards the bright light where everyone was looking on with awe. Izuku had to put his hand out in front of him as he looked at the sky. The sky looked like it was cracked with a massive hole opening it wide. The hole being the source of the ungodly bright light. The light was golden in color, and when Izuku was able to look at it without squinting, he felt it trying to pull him, and he took 1 step, 2, 3. His arm was yanked back by an invisible face. Don't, Kyujo hissed. Izuku looked back at the sky. He then looked at his classmates. They're all looking on in absolute horror, and he couldn't blame them. Even Shoto looked horror-struck as he stared up at the massive thing in the sky. TCH. The pain happened suddenly, and Izuku grabbed his head. Images were flashing before his eyes at an insane rate. Images of him. But they weren't him. Izuku wasn't on the ground anymore. Float wasn't engaged. So this wasn't his doing. As he slowly raised from the ground, Izuku was being pulled towards this thing against his will, and neither he nor Kyujo could fight it. He could feel it pulling them into its grasp like a mighty hand was grabbing him, pulling him up into the air. The images in his mind flashed faster than before. A woman, a girl, him, the cat. Izuku felt himself being pulled closer and closer into this light. He was ungodly high in the air, so high that all the breath left his lungs. As the air thinned, Izuku looked into the light. The swirling light that seemed to resonate with him. It's beautiful. He finally found his voice. Izuku was then yanked into the light. It was bright. God. Was it bright? Then light died and he was in the air, in a void. When he looked around the void, he saw lights, 6 other lights all going in the same direction as him. All the lights shone brightly, and if he strained his ears, Izuku was sure he could hear screaming. That's about all he could see before he was shot towards the same direction as a speed that made him feel like he was going top speed down a water slide. Izuku then saw it. The same bright light coming right back up, and he braced for impact. Izuku blacked out for just a moment. He and Kyujo both blacked out. When he woke, he was laying against the pavement. Kyujo. Izuku groaned. I'm here. Kyujo also groaned, and Izuku flipped over to his back to stare at the nighttime sky. Izuku gave a weak cough as he stared at the stars above his head. The air was cold, too cold like. It felt like winter almost, which was strange considering summer was right around the corner. I think I broke something, Izuku admitted as he continued to stare at the sky above. The sound of car alarms blared in the distance along with sirens started to fill the air. Izuku propped one leg up to try and help him stand, but he realized he just couldn't. You absolutely broke something. Hey, the familiar voice of Denki filled the air, and soon Denki was in front of him. Dude, are you okay? Denki asked as he offered his hand for Izuku to take. Been better, Izuku whispered honestly as he looked up at Denki's concerned face. Broke something for sure. How is everyone? Us? We're fine. Jesus, you're freezing. Denki helped Izuku to his feet, and Izuku grunted as he put his hand against the small of his back. Yep, he wheezed slowly as he bent down. I broke a rib for sure, he whispered. What the hell happened? And what did you do to your hair? Izuku snorted at Denki's comment. Izuku's undercut was probably not the best looking right now, not with whatever the hell he just faced. I dunno. Denk's light just sucked me in and now I'm back. Izuku ignored the hair comment and gave the area a look around. His classmates were all outside along with a few from the other classes all looking at him. A cold breeze swept by and Izuku shivered against it. It must have. Denki was looking at Izuku confused. Come on. Denki then took off his jacket and put it around Izuku's shoulders. Let's get you inside before you freeze, he offered, and helped lead Izuku towards the dorms. Izuku squinted against the bright light of the dorm as he was led inside. He put his hand out and winced against the light. It took a few moments, but he managed to get used to the light. Everyone was looking at him, all with equal levels of confusion. Bakugo stepped up to him. What the fuck? He yelled at him. I don't know. Izuku shot back with no hesitation, making Bakugo blink. Okay. I don't know what happened. 1 minute I'm on the ground. The next thing I know that thing sucked me in and spat me right back out. You wearing your boxers? Hagakure asked as she looked Izuku up and down. I had just laid down, he told her with a raised eyebrow like she hadn't also woken up from the bright light. Hagakure took out her phone and gave a soft, I mean I guess, but you're okay? Ada asked as he stepped up to him. Outside of being in your underwear, of course. Yeah, outside of a broken rib or two as well. Izuku huddled in Denki's jack a little more. Despite being inside, he was still cold, mostly in his feet and fingers that for some reason got them laughing. Figures you'd break something, Cyril laughed as he slapped Izuku on the shoulder and Izuku narrowed his eyes. Ada chopped his hand between Izuku and Cyril. I'm sure Recovery Girl can help you. Izuku shook his head at Ada's voice. No, I'll be fine. Super regeneration is already healing them. It just needed a second, he thought. Thanks for the jacket. Thanks. Izuku went to shed the jacket off as he stepped up to Denki. I'm just glad nothing horrific came from this. Kyujo and I are tired and need to rest up, he grunted and then rubbed at his eyes. The air became heavy as everyone looked at each other with a mixture of even more confusion, and some stood up a bit more straighter. Then came the question, a question he felt he should have seen coming. In all honesty, Denki looked confused before he asked it. Kyujo, what are you talking about, dude? And when did you start calling me Denks? That's twice now. Denki laughed an awkward but tense laugh. Izuku froze. Everyone froze. Even Kyujo froze. Deku, where are your scars? Bakugo demanded in a low voice. Those that were by him backed up as they looked at him like he was a villain. Bakugo was looking at his right arm like he expected something to be there. Izuku saw Bakugo's hands start to glow and Kyujo stirred but didn't emerge. The scars, he whispered as it was starting to feel like ice was being poured down his back as he looked at his friends, though now his friends were looking at him like they weren't friends. Silence filled the air as heavy tension fell upon all of them. Izuku's eyes flickered to everyone, and they all stared back at him with wariness and apprehension. Nobody moved. 20 sets of eyes were all on him. Izuku spotted Aoyama sitting on the couch, which he shouldn't be because Aoyama got arrested for being the UA traitor after confessing to Izuku. Then Izuku spotted Minta standing amongst the others, which should be in 1B. Achako then stepped up to him. All right. Toga, they were surrounding him now. Izuku realized they were all slowly surrounding him like one would a crazed animal. You've been caught. Come quietly and you won't get hurt, Ida said, and Izuku gnashed his teeth. I am not Toga Himiko. Izuku yelled to them as he took a step back. That's something Toga would say. Denki yelled because of course he would. I can prove it. Izuku yelled suddenly as he put his hands out before they surrounded him. Toga has a shape-shifting quirk. I don't. I have Kyujo. Who is Kyujo? Mina demanded, and Izuku was starting to feel caged in as he looked around. His breathing picked up as he looked at everyone. Then when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, any more awkward, the door opened. Is everyone okay? I ran as fast. It was like looking into a mirror as Izuku looked at himself, only this him was different. Izuku's eyes gazed towards the other Izuku's right arm and saw at his hand it was scared and gnarled. They stared at one another as the tension rose to a peak between everyone. Run. Kyujo was right on this one, knowing when to bow out and figure things out because this wasn't right. Wait, the other Izuku stepped up, but Izuku wasn't having it. One for all coiled around him and he tried to run for the door. Bakugo stepped in front of him and Izuku reacted quickly by jumping over him and putting a hand on Bakugo's shoulder to help catapult himself over the blonde. Gonna need your help here, Kyujo. Izuku called as the others were now racing to stop him from leaving Roger. Kyujo called out and took control, making Izuku's hair go from green and curly to white and straight. Wait, Black Whip shot out from the other Izuku's hand and that threw Kyujo and Izuku off, and Black Whip grabbed his arm and Kyujo raised his free arm up and flicked a blast of wind towards the other Izuku. He managed to hold his ground, but the windows nearby had not as they blew out from the gust and sent glass shattering everywhere. This forced Izuku to let go of him as he braced himself for the attack. Kyujo used float to get him to the next level, and he hung off of the railing as he stared down at the other Izuku. You have the same quirk as us, Kyujo commented. Kyujo are supposed to be running, Izuku commented softly, and Kyujo waved him off. Instead he focused back on the other Izuku while the others stared at him, some amazed, some scared because of the air Kyujo always carried with him, and some looked murderous. The other Izuku narrowed his eyes at Kyujo as his breathing picked up. Yes, it appears we do. But you seem to have one extra. This Izuku was teetering on the edge of caution as he spoke while looking at him. Kyujo grinned. More than one extra. I'm afraid more than you. That is, I could give you a demonstration, but I'm getting the feeling I'm not welcome. Say the word. Izuku Ida stepped up and several others stepped up ready to fight. Shoto unfortunately was one of them as his fire and ice were both at the ready. Okay, that one hurt and it made Kyujo frown as well. Wait, Izuku put a hand up stopping any attacks, and that made Kyujo wary as he stood on the small space past the railing and stared down at everyone in the common room. What are you exactly? Well, Kyujo did a backflip, using the railing as a beam to flip him on the other side. This has been fun. Wait, the other Izuku yelled once it was clear that Kyujo was getting ready to bail. But we have to go. Kyujo yelled with a laugh before he spotted his exit, a window facing the outside, one for all coiled around him, red and green like Christmas lights. And he raised his hand and flicked a puff of air to break the window open. Glass broke out to the other side and the window was just wide enough for him to jump out of. I said wait. There was green as the other Izuku used his own one for all to jump up to the second floor and actually slide on his thigh. Once he hit the ground, he scrambled to his feet in an attempt to catch up. Not exactly an acrobat, are you? Izuku couldn't help but chime in as he looked back at the other him. No, not in the slightest it seems, Kyujo whistled while he continued to run at an arguably slow pace even with one for all. Kyujo, I know you're faster than this, Izuku said in his mind as the other Izuku started giving chase with one for all coiling a vibrant green all around his body. I've seen you outrun Dad. Kyujo grinned as the other Izuku was catching up to them. Yes, but you see, other me. If there's one other person I like messing with, that is not the old man. The other Izuku was inches away from them and Kyujo leaped. He leaped high in the air and did a backflip using the other Izuku to jump from, so he was now behind the boy. It's you, Kyujo said while smiling. This Izuku immediately turned back around. Please, just wait. Kyujo charged forward, this time actually using his top speed, and by the time Izuku blinked, Kyujo was already back behind him and at the window. Izuku spun back around with wide eyes and Kyujo gave him a salute by, and he dropped from the second-story window like a deadweight. While still in the air, Kyujo raised his hand up and Black Whip sprang forth on command. He used Black Whip to grab onto the nearest light post and propelled himself to it, landing on the very top with ease. We look ridiculous, Izuku commented, and then shivered at the cold air as he was still in just a tank top and boxers. The metal of the lamp they were resting on stung his bare feet and made him hiss in pain. Yes, let's get out of UA. Danger sense kicked on quickly and harshly, making both boys wince at the pain. Wait, Dad's our teacher, right? Yes, making him their teacher as well. It would be logical to assume so. And they all have phones, some making calls as we were talking to the other. Izuku. Yes, run. Kyujo jumped from the lamp post swiftly and went to activate one for all, but it didn't activate shit. Kyujo yelled as he could only rely on his own speed for now. He heard it behind him, the sound of someone dropping from above, only to be followed by louder, heavier footsteps. There was a grunt and Kyujo was just barely able to jump before a familiar capture scarf reached to take his leg. Hey. Old man Kyujo looked over his shoulder and in the darkness of the night didn't even see Shouta. He just saw the silhouette of a man and two incensed glowing red eyes. Kyujo, honest to God, yelped in fear. That was when the scarf managed to snag him around the middle. As he was distracted, the scarf yanked him towards Aizawa, and Kyujo could do nothing as he roughly kicked against the head. The kick had him seeing stars as he hit the ground. Kyujo let out a shudder from the ground, and he tasted BLD as his lip had busted open. Thankfully, super regeneration healed him quickly. All of his air was swept immediately out of his lungs when Aizawa tightened both ends of the scarf around Kyujo's stomach. Retreat. Izuku took control as he pushed Kyujo out of the way. You look like one of my students, Aizawa said when Izuku took control, but I know for a fact you're not Toga. Not Toga. Izuku wheezed as he wanted to reach for his father, but he felt like that wouldn't end well, mainly because this Aizawa clearly didn't see Izuku as his son. If I'm not his son, then what are we to him? Izuku was almost heartbroken as he struggled against the scarf holding him tightly. Right, no, we're a villain to him, Kyujo said sadly, and Izuku let out another wheeze when Aizawa put his foot down on his neck. Not choking him, but getting close. Dad, Izuku whispered in a raspy and wheezy voice, but his plea fell on deaf ears, or did it? Because Aizawa took his foot off of Izuku's neck and stared down at him with cold and calculating eyes while his face twisted into a bit of a snarl before he peeped his boot back and struck Izuku right in the head, knocking him out instantly. Izuku was down for the count, so Kyujo was forced out. But by the time he opened his eyes, some time had clearly passed. This was apparent by the fact that he was not only in a room, but was chained to a lone table with quirk-suppressant cuffs wrapped around his wrist and legs alike. At least I'm not muzzled, Kyujo thought back to the time he was muzzled by the cops and shuddered. He looked around the room and deduced that this was a room in UA. It was a room that was stripped of everything except for the table and chairs. Smart, Kyujo chewed on his lip. The less there is, the less I can use as a potential weapon. Kyujo sucked in a deep breath, and for several long minutes he was forced to just sit there as he learned he was bound to the chair by rope that was digging into his bare legs. What's worse than being bound? Being bound in your underwear, he thought with a huff. At least he was grateful he had the tank top on. The sound of the rattling doorknob behind him made Kyujo tense a bit. The door opened. Nothing was said, but he listened for the footsteps. Toshinori. Kyujo looked over his shoulder at the lanky man. They stared at one another with Kyujo narrowing his red eyes. I have nothing to say to you, he put it simply. Toshinori looked a little shocked. His mouth opened and blue eyes slightly wide, then he straightened up and maintained his composure. All for one. Kyujo hissed. I know all for one when I see him. Kyujo yelled. This time around there was a silence between the two, and then Toshinori nodded. Very well, Kyujo. Kyujo snorted and turned away from Toshinori once again. I have nothing to say to you. Toshinori walked over to the other side of the table and took a seat. It reminded Kyujo of an interrogation, because it is, he told himself as he stared at Toshinori with a leveled gaze. Kyujo, Toshinori whispered and then leaned in a bit so he was getting a better look at the quirk. But you're also Izuku. Izuku Midoriya. Aizawa, Kyujo answered softly. Excuse me. Toshinori raised a blonde eyebrow in question. Izuku, Aizawa, Kyujo corrected and swallowed softly. Then he used his cuffed hand to point at himself. I'm his quirk, his protector, Kyujo. Aizawa. I guess if you want to get technical, Kyujo admitted and leaned into his seat. I would like to talk to Izuku, Toshinori softly spoke, which was interesting considering Toshinori was usually so wary about Kyujo, even after All for One's death. You can't. Why? Because the other me is currently unconscious, Kyujo said. It was the most normal thing in the world. This made Toshinori's eyebrow raise even higher. Other me, he repeated like he was scared to know what that meant. Izuku and I are one and the same. I'm his quirk, but I am also him, therefore he is the other me, Kyujo explained, and Toshinori's eyebrow was close to flying off of his forehead at this point. But you're all for one. Kyujo growled in a warning. I'm not all for one, get it through your head. I'm just a little confused, Toshinori finally admitted. You see, Izuku is currently in the next room, but yet you are also Izuku, you and the other you. Kyujo looked towards the wall and just stared at it like it would show him the other Izuku. Yeah, we're confused about that as well, Kyujo admitted to Toshinori. And you have one for all, Toshinori whispered slowly and lowly like it was a big secret. Well, it was one for all was something Izuku hasn't even told Shoto about yet, the same as Izuku, but per your own words you have more quirks than the Izuku outside the door. Kyujo smiled as he put his hand to his cheek. Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, you have both one for all and all for one. You're not wrong, so you're all for one. No, I just have his quirk, he whispered softly. I'm his son, Kyujo whispered to Toshinori, making Toshinori's eyes go even wider. But you just said Aizawa. Adopted. I would really like to speak to your Izuku, please. Kyujo only smiled a little. I told you unconscious, so until he wakes up you're stuck with me. The door opened again and Kyujo just listened for the footsteps. He then smiled. Other me, but not quite. He looked back at the other Izuku. Now that Kyujo couldn't run, he was forced to look at this Izuku. While they looked almost identical, there were still a few things off, like his hair. Obviously, this Izuku had the familiar curly hair that wasn't undercut like Kyujo's. This Izuku was clearly wary and his eyes narrowed in question. My boy, please, you said you'd just listen, and Toshinori said in a soft voice, but this Izuku didn't listen as he stepped up slowly to Kyujo. Nothing was said as they just looked at each other. You said all for one was your father, Izuku whispered to Kyujo as he made a wide berth around Kyujo. Boo! Kyujo made it look like he was going to lunge as he shouted, and this Izuku took a quick step back. This made Kyujo laugh softly. You're so skittish. Erg me head. Don't do that, Toshinori told him rather sternly, and then stood and put his hands on Izuku's shoulders. My boy, you should go. This is clearly some sort of villain trying to mess with you. He told this to Izuku and tried to push him out. These two had some sort of relationship, one a little tighter than Izuku's own relationship with Toshinori. This was clear when Izuku tapped Toshinori's hand. Wait, all might remember the dream I told you about, Izuku whispered as he turned to hold Toshinori from pushing him out of the door. Let me ask him something. Toshinori looked back at Kyujo and Kyujo just smiled and waggled his fingers in a wave. I'm all ears. Different me, Kyujo said with a grin as he leaned back in the chair, and if he wasn't bound he would have put one leg over the other. Izuku swallowed hard and looked at Toshinori, who nodded and then looked back at Kyujo. I dreamt that I was surrounded by several different versions of myself, and I swear you may have been one of them. Kyujo narrowed his eyes. You know you can't always trust dreams. I once had a dream that I was flying on cotton candy. Wait, Kyujo stopped talking immediately when the other him finally woke up. Kyujo, wait, let me take over, Izuku demanded, and Kyujo relaxed in the chair. And he looked at the other Izuku. Sorry, you don't get to know the rest of my dream, Kyujo flippantly said with a wave of his hand. The other me woke up with that declaration. Kyujo stepped back and allowed Izuku to take over. Izuku sighed and moved his hair behind his head with a head shake as his hair started to curl back up. Then the two Izukus were staring at each other with the other Izuku's eyes growing wide as he watched this happen. Man, I wish I had my notebook, but no. This Izuku shook his head quickly. Focus, the Urkwork said that all for one is your dad, was Izuku corrected in a soft voice as he felt the rope dig into his thighs. He's dead. But he's not, Izuku whispered. He's still in Terratus. They looked at each other. You don't belong here, the other Izuku finally said. Yeah, I figured that out when my dad kicked me in the face. You told All Might you were adopted by Aizawa. Yeah, since I was 5. There was another silence over them, one that would be broken when the door opened, and this time Aizawa walked in. Toshinori scurried up to the man and whispered to him. It was clear what he said as Aizawa turned to look at Izuku, and both Izukus just sort of shied away from the man's gaze. You have ID? Aizawa asked Izuku. Izuku looked at himself and then back at Aizawa, considering I'm in my boxers now. Aizawa rolled his eyes. What a coincidence. Toshinori's phone rang and he quickly scrambled to answer it, which was funny because a moment later Aizawa's own phone rang and he narrowed his eyes at the bound Izuku before turning to answer his phone. What? Hitoshi? He asked, and Izuku perked at Hitoshi's name. This caught the other Izuku's attention. You know Shinsu? Izuku frowned before he visibly wilted. He goes by Shinsu, he whispered softly, and this also made Kyujo frown. Well, that's good. That means his parents are alive. I'm glad. His parents are dead. Where you're from? He's my brother. Izuku bowed his head down. Dad adopted us both. I see. Then at the same time both Aizawa and Toshinori put their hands to their phones and turned to one another at the same time. They both spoke the exact same phrase. You're not going to believe this. Bet, no. Izuku woke with a gasp, tears already collecting in his eyes despite the fact he had just woken up. That dream again, he thought as he slowly sat up from his bed. For the past 3 days, Izuku has been having a recurring dream. A dream that he honestly never remembers except for the fact that someone always screams vet, no at him, and without fail it makes him cry. He sniffled and wiped his tears away with the palm of his hand. Quietly he looked at his alarm clock. 4:45 a.m. it read in bright neon red. I gotta get up anyways, he grumbled before slowly moving his body so his legs were over the edge of the bed. 2 slender arms wrapped around his chubby belly and a face pressed into his back. Early Rody whined softly while he clung to Izuku like a koala. Izuku smiled down at Rody before he gently patted Rody's shaggy hair. Rody was off today from commercial piloting, so that meant the two of them got to enjoy each other's company. I know, Izuku whispered to Rody, but if I don't get up the chickens will get cranky that I haven't fed them. Rody huffed. Sometimes I swear you love those birds more than me, he teased, and it made Izuku smile. Before he got up from bed, the cold clayed air already seeped into the house and chilled Izuku to the bone. Winter was brutal this year, with the temperature today being in the negatives. Izuku started to get dressed to get his day started. He put his long hair up into a ponytail that grazed the back of his neck, and then he made sure he was wearing thick clothing to combat the winter. Thick brown jacket with a fur lining on the inside, blue jeans, and thick woolen socks. He grabbed his gloves and walked over to his bed, where he sat down. As he grabbed his boots, they were simple boots that he just pulled up. No laces required. They worked for every season, be it hot or cold. Rody's hand came into view and he took Izuku's hand into his. How is it? Your quirk, that is, any flare-ups? Rody inquired as he inspected Izuku's fingers for any Inkai darkness that may start creeping. As it stood, only Izuku's nails were black, a random flare-up that happened a few days prior, roughly when his dream started. No, Izuku whispered to Rody, I just don't understand why it won't go away. I mean, at least it looks like I painted my nails, but I don't want to lose control. Like his voice died as he didn't want to think about it. Nothing is decaying when you touch it? Rody asked, and Izuku shook his head. Well, hopefully, it'll go away before too long. Rody yawned loudly and let go of Izuku's hand. Izuku smiled at him before leaning down and kissing his boyfriend's forehead. Get some sleep, Izuku ordered. I can handle the animals. Rody moaned and then laid back down on his pillows. He didn't need any other convincing, and it made Izuku smile. Izuku then walked out of their shared bedroom and silently shut the door. Their home was quiet as the early morning sun was starting to peek through the house. Roro and Lala would still be sleeping, no doubt, and Izuku let them sleep as he walked through the house. He got to their quaint little kitchen and turned on the coffee pot. He leaned his back against the counter and thought about all that led him here, and now something his younger self never would have seen possible. It started when he got his quirk, a healing quirk, powerful, that could heal almost any injury. His father, Hisashi Midoriya, or rather All for One, saw this and locked Izuku away, far away from Japan. Izuku lived in Otheon since he was 9 years old. All for One lied to Izuku, dripping poison into his son's ear about the heroes, telling Izuku how the heroes would abuse him for his quirk, making Izuku afraid of the outside world. It wasn't until Izuku was 18 did he meet Rody's soul. Rody had stumbled upon Izuku's cabin. Rody showed Izuku the outside world, something Izuku hadn't seen since he was 4. Everything Izuku knew was a lie, and it only intensified when Bakugo, Izuku's long-lost best friend, told him the very truth, that All for One killed Izuku's mother and co. Izuku confronted his father about this, of course, and when his father didn't deny it, Izuku's simple healing quirk awoke into something terrifying. His quirk now had two sides. He heals as long as his emotions are kept under control. However, if distressed enough, Izuku can also wither those around him. He killed All for One by reversing the healing he previously granted his father. In the past, his father died, and it sent Izuku over the edge. He hadn't meant to kill him. Izuku killed everything in his path, which thankfully were just a bunch of trees and his own garden. Rody came in and managed to calm Izuku down, bringing him back from the brink of his own chaotic quirk. Then they ran away together, ran away from the remaining league, which included Izuku's brother Tamura, of course, and now 5 years later they are here in Clade. Izuku, after quirk training, was able to use his healing side even better. He worked as a veterinarian as their humble farm grew into an animal rescue in the warmer months. They have a farmer's market going for extra cash, not that they really needed it in all honesty, but it was a fun hobby in the colder months. It's mainly up to Rody, now a commercial pilot, to provide the money while Izuku works on the farm, making sure the animals are well fed and happy. It was a cozy life and one Izuku loved. The coffee pot finished brewing and Izuku grabbed his thermos and poured the hot coffee in. Once filled and sweetened to his liking, he capped off his thermos and walked for the front door. He grabbed his bandana off of the key rack, a simple green one, paused to wrap it around his nose and mouth before tucking the end into his jacket and tying it off. The bandana was needed in these cold months if Izuku wanted to keep his nose. He then grabbed his bomber fur-lined cap and put that over his head, ears. Once the bandana was around his face, he walked out of the quiet house. Instantly, bone-chilling air hit the uncovered part of his face and made him wince a little. Still, he got to work. Thankfully, with winter, he didn't have to tend to his garden. Just make sure the animals were fed and okay. Before doing any of that, he treads through the thick, powdery, freshly fallen snow. The sky was a dusty gray, showing that it was probably going to snow again later on. Izuku went straight for the shed, opened the door. He grabbed his tranquilizer gun that was hanging off of a rack. The gun wasn't for his own animals, but in case any brave coyotes or wolves decided to try to pick off their chickens. The gun itself had a strap that Izuku used to let gun rest on his back with the strap on his shoulder. Izuku then shut the door and went about his chores. First, the chickens. Good morning, Izuku called to his birds. Once he opened the door to the coop, his hens all clucked back and some fluttered away in surprise. The heat lamps were on and all working. Izuku fed his chickens and made sure the water wasn't frost or frozen, and then he fed them with his homemade chicken feed. A few more months, guys. Then you can go back to roaming outside, he promised his hens. The rooster came up to Izuku and pecked at Izuku's boots. Yeah, Izuku patted the rooster on the head. The rooster tried to peck at him, but Izuku heeded him no mind. Then he left once everything seemed to be in order and the chickens had plenty of food. He left the coop and locked it behind him so nothing could get into it. Before he moved on to his emu Okitori, he looked out at the edge of their farm. He made sure there were no predators out on the horizon stalking the farm. Izuku grabbed his head as a sharp pain seemed to shoot through the base of his neck and up straight to his head. He had no idea where the pain had come from. It had just happened. Thankfully, the pain subsided relatively quickly and Izuku gave his head a firm shake. Maybe it was just a muscle spasm. He wondered while walking to Okitori's pen. The emu was laying under his own heat lamp and his bedding was extra heavy to combat the winter. Morning. Okitori. Izuku greeted his extra large bird. Okitori wasn't on the offense today. A good sign. Izuku fed him and made sure his water was clean and not frozen. Once everything was in order, he moved on to his next chore. Izuku was walking towards the stables when he nearly fell to his knees as another stabbing pain jerked through his head. This one felt like it penetrated through his eye socket and came out the other side of his head. A loud grunt left his mouth as he rubbed at the eye in question. The snow seeped through his blue jeans while he crouched down. What was before he could even ask? It was like the sky exploded. A noise, something akin to an explosion, sounded through the air, and it was followed by a powerful gust of wind that blew the snow in every direction. Izuku was glad he was crouching, as he was sure if he wasn't he would have gone flying. He put his arm up to block the blowing snow from hitting his eyes, and he shut his eyes as well. The animals were going crazy. He could hear them. The horses were pounding against the stables. The chickens were panicking and trying to fly out of their coop, and his emu had now stood from his own stable and was pacing around. When Izuku was able to open his eyes once the wind calmed down, he was shocked to see that it looked like it was now the middle of the day despite it being just shy of 6 in the morning. At this point he looked at the sky. There was a light that shone down upon him and made the sky look broken. Izuku couldn't describe the feeling running through his veins as he slowly stood and took his bomber cap off of his head. He let the cap fall to the ground as he felt a sort of resonance with the thing in the sky. Izuku! Rodi's shout came from the house. Izuku looked over his shoulder to see Rodi, Roro, and Lala all emerging from the house. Rodi was still in his boxers and sleeping shirt. He had thrown on a pair of boots as he rushed out of the house. Are you okay? What is that? Rodi demanded as he ran for Izuku at a fast speed. The cold didn't seem to bug Rodi as he ran to make sure Izuku was okay. I'll get inside. Izuku turned his back towards the bright light while standing up straight. You'll get sick, he tried to tell Rodi as Rodi was closing the gap between him and Izuku. Something wrapped around Izuku's ankle, and he hit the ground with a gasp as his feet were pulled from under him. He hit the snow with a gasp, leaving his mouth. Izuku looked back to see just what had grabbed him and saw nothing. But that didn't mean anything as he was being pulled by this invisible force. All time seemed to freeze as Izuku was pulled into the air by his ankle. Like something from the sky had him and was inspecting him as he dangled upside down looking at the ground below him. Izuku couldn't fight back as he looked from the ground and into the lights. The light was bright but didn't hurt his eyes all that bad as he felt that familiar resonation pull at him again like he knew this light. All at once images flashed at him in rapid fire, images of himself. But not they all looked different. Izuku felt like he was in a tunnel as he was sucked into the light at speeds he didn't know was possible. Izuku let out a shriek as he flew through this tunnel, and for just one moment he realized he wasn't alone. He didn't get to count, but there were several others. Other lights moving with him, all of them going to the same location. Izuku realized that he was still upside down just a little too late. It was like he was spat out of the light at Mach speed. He saw the trash cans and could do nothing when he slammed headfirst into the metal cans. The cans rattled and one even fell right on top of him. Thankfully they were empty so trash did not spill on Izuku. Still it didn't feel good crashing headfirst into trash cans and then having one slam into his ribcage. Izuku groaned. It was a deep groan that rattled his core. Thathard mumbled and then pushed the trash can off of him. It clattered loudly and then rolled away with ease. Izuku looked at where he was and he appeared to be in an alleyway. Odd, he grunted and grabbed the wall behind him to help himself up. The nearest town is an hour away. Izuku winced when he agitated his ribs. The trash can was not kind. God, I hope nothing is broken. Yeah, he can heal, but not himself, he hissed in pain once he was fully on his feet. Izuku turned towards the alleyway opening. Something didn't seem right. The buildings that he could see he didn't recognize, and the talking. From what he could hear, it wasn't in English, which was weird because Clade and Othian were mostly English speakers. Izuku walked out through the opening and looked around. He took a startled step back in alarm when he saw Japanese street signs that also appeared to be dark. He looked around frantically. People were mostly talking about the strange lights in the sky as they hurried on about their business. Izuku looked around frantically. Rodi, he whispered. Rodi was right there. He must have gotten sucked in as well. all of his pain forgotten for the time being. Izuku took off in a sprint towards the first group of people he could find. There was a man that looked like a shark and he was talking to a woman with squid-like tentacles for hair. Excuse me. Izuku ran straight for the man and the man looked confused. Something happened. I don't know where I am. I'm not alone. I don't understand you. The man shook his head. I don't speak English. Sorry. Izuku let out a groan. I'm lost. He translated it into Japanese. I don't know where I am and I'm not alone. He had to speak slowly while trying to force himself to remember Japanese. He was so used to Clade and Athena that after 5 years he just forgot how to speak Japanese, not just in his panic, but almost in general. He didn't really forget, but he's so used to speaking English, especially in Clade. The man tilted his head at him. I don't know what happened. You're speaking English again. Forget it. He threw his arms up, turned his heel, and ran. He was wasting time. Rody, Roro, and Lala too for that matter could be lost and scared in the middle of Japan. So, Izuku started to run. He didn't know where he was going to go, but he had to start looking. Rody, he yelled while running down the sidewalk. Lala, Roro, can any of you hear me? He cried, earning him looks from those passing him. Rody. Izuku skidded around a corner and looked around. He didn't recognize anything. He panted heavily while looking at the unknown buildings, street signs, and people. English. He finally yelled, does anybody speak English? He was better at speaking English than Japanese now. Izuku was cursing at himself for not keeping up with his own language better. People looked at him like he was crazy and none stopped as they kept walking. For a moment Izuku felt lost. Midoriya. Hearing his name, Izuku turned to see who was speaking to him. He frowned because there wasn't anybody he knew around. Am I just hearing things? A man wearing a beige fedora, matching trench coat, black slacks and shoes stepped up to Izuku and gently snapped his fingers in front of his face. Midoriya, are you okay? What are you wearing? The man inquired as he took in Izuku's outfit. His eyebrow rose even higher as he continued to stare at Izuku. You're Izuku, Midoriya, right? He asked. Yes, this man clearly knew him, but Izuku sure as hell didn't know him. What on earth? The man actually grabbed Izuku's arm and lifted it up. Were you hit by a quirk? He asked while taking all of Midoriya in. Yes, he yelled in English. A light came and took me and maybe my boyfriend. You have to help me get to a cop or a hero or something. I'm worried about my boyfriend and his siblings. Are you speaking in English? Izuku threw his arms up in exasperation. I'm sorry. I'm not. I haven't been to Japan in so long. I'm trying to relearn the language, he whispered and shut his eyes. His bandana was grabbed and the man pulled it down to look at Izuku's whole face. I just had to be sure. He mumbled this, which made Izuku frown. Look, I don't have time for this, sir. I need a cop. Midoriya. The man flashed something in front of Izuku's face and Izuku saw it was a badge. Oh, he was a cop. Recognize me yet? Izuku leaned down to look at the man's name, Tsukachi Naomasa. Read it, and Izuku just looked at him and spoke the honest-to-God truth. I have never seen you a day in my life. This made the man frown and take off his hat as if that would help Izuku. Izuku pulled his bandana back up when the cold air hit his face. Look, like I said, too don't know where I am. I just know that my boyfriend and his siblings could be here the same as me. Come on, I'll take you to the station. How old are you? I'm 22, he said, and the man blinked. I'll take you to the station and we'll see if we can help you find your boyfriend and his siblings. Come on. Tsukachi offered his hand to Izuku and Izuku took it. He felt like a toddler. But this was better than running around like a chicken with his head cut off at least. I won't lie to you, sir, Izuku softly spoke, making Tsukachi look at him. I hope my boyfriend isn't here. That light, whatever it was freaky. Light, the ones that showed up across the sky a while ago. I guess. It lit my whole farm up, made it look day. By the way, what time is it? He inquired once he looked at the nighttime sky. The time. The detective took his phone out of his pocket to look at it. It's nearly 8 at night. How strange. Then again, I am in Japan. What do you mean by that? The man was giving him a confused look now and Izuku looked back at him. I live in Clade. Oh, I see. I guess that's another question for the station. Yeah, I guess. Izuku looked at his gloved hand, the one that wasn't being held by this detective. Why was this man holding his hand? Did he think Izuku was going to run? Whatever. Izuku would look at his fingers once he was inside. He didn't want to look at them now, didn't even want to think about it. The man wasn't dying, so that meant Izuku's quirk wasn't going off. Good. There was that at least. Still, Izuku jerked him out of the man's grip. I don't want you touching me. I don't want to hurt you. Izuku told him to be as non-threatening as possible. My quirk is volatile, and if it goes off you could get hurt. The man stared at him. One for all. He whispered so lowly that Izuku almost didn't hear him. One for no, it's not that. True. What? Nothing. Let's just hurry. Hitomi Shinsu's life has been interesting. To be fair, she's only 13. But a 13-year-old can have an interesting life. She believes she has 2 loving parents who are both pro heroes who love each other a lot. Her mother was the best pro hero in all of Japan, who's been #1 ranking for the longest time. Her father was underground and didn't like the flash cameras or limelight like her mother. They lived in a nice house. Nothing fancy like the Todorokis, but a nice home regardless. Hitomi was currently eating breakfast as she watched her parents get ready for work. Her parents, both dressed in their hero outfits, watched as they met at one point with her mother putting her father's capture scarf around his neck. See you tonight. Toshi, her mom said before kissing her father briefly on the lips. See you tonight, kitten, he told her and returned the brief kiss. Be good at school. Hitomi, her father, told her, and she nodded with a smile. I love you, he told them both, and Izumi gave him another kiss. Love you, she told him, and he was out the door. Yep, her parents loved each other a lot better than most from what she's seen apparently. They've been in love since high school, a long time in Hitomi's eyes. Are you almost finished? Her mother asked as she came up and grabbed a piece of buttered toast for herself and started to quickly eat it. Hitomi nodded as she finished off the last of her breakfast and got up to put her dirty plate in the sink. Once in the sink, she filled the bowl with water and turned to her mother. Her mother already had Hitomi's backpack in her hands and helped Hitomi into it. This is despite Hitomi telling her mother that she didn't need to do this anymore. But alas, her mother never listened when it came to that. Now, Iri and Koda are gonna bring you home after school, her mother explained as she ran her fingers through Hitomi's wild purple hair. Hitomi got a lot of her father in her. There was no denying Hitoshi was her father, as Hitomi was his clone. She got his wild purple hair, which was even more wild because her hair was curly like her mother's. She got his height, nose, and eye shape. She only had her mother's eyes in one eye. Her other eye was purple like her father's. Izumi smiled at her daughter. All right, let's get going. Hitomi gave her mother a smile before going for the door. Izumi followed her daughter out and she shut and locked the door behind her. The two of them walked towards the car where a driver was waiting for them. Good morning, Deku, the driver greeted her mother with a bow. Miss Hitomi. Mr. Watashi. Hitomi bowed back respectfully as the driver opened the back door for the two of them to get in. Now, her mother had her license as a just-in-case situation, but did decide to splurge on a driver for them. She offered one for Hitoshi, but Hitoshi denied the offer. Hitomi and her mother sat side by side while Mr. Watashi got in, and soon they were driving off. Hitomi's school wasn't too far, maybe 15 minutes away, so she elected to pass the time by reading. Her mother watched her with a fond smile. Hitomi loved to read, mostly fantasy books, but she still loved to read regardless. How Hitomi loved to get lost in the pages of a book. Hitomi often got so lost that she would have to be shaken to get out of the car. Izumi hummed softly while looking at her phone and browsing the internet, no doubt seeing if there was any activity she should be on the lookout for before her patrol. All in all, it was a normal day. Until it wasn't. It had happened so suddenly that it caught them all off guard. It was like the sun cranked its light up to 500 as it was so blinding that Mr. Watashi stomped on the brakes. Izumi's reflexes were like lightning as she wrapped her arm around her daughter to stop Hitomi from smacking the seat in front of her. Hitomi gave a gasp at this while her book dropped to the ground. Are you? Before her mother could ask, their car lurched forward violently as they were rear-ended. Hitomi gave a startled yelp at the sudden movement. There was crashing all around them as more and more cars slammed into one another. Then it was done. Not the bright light, but the horrible sound of metal on metal. Izumi and Hitomi were slow to look at one another before her mother tried again. Are you okay? Izumi asked, and Hitomi nodded slowly and cautiously as she swallowed hard. Mr. Watashi? Izumi inquired, and their driver didn't respond. No. He was very much awake and just staring at the sky with wide eyes and an agape mouth. Upon seeing this, her mother let go of Hitomi. Don't leave the car, she ordered of her daughter, and opened the door. The door opened simply, and her mother stepped out to look at the sky the same as everyone else around them out of her window. Hitomi could see the civilians all walking forward with wide eyes of terror like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Deku, what is that thing? A man recognized Hitomi's mother and approached, hoping she would have all of the answers. Her mother paused with a frown. I don't know, she admitted to the man while stepping forward like she was trying to get a closer look. She just stared the same as everyone else. Hitomi wanted to get out of the car to see, but her mother told her to stay put. The ground started to tremble and Hitomi gasped as she grasped the door handle as tightly as possible. Hitomi looked towards her mother, and for a moment the two of them locked eyes. It was for just a brief moment that they stared at one another. Then her mother was gone. Mommy, Hitomi cried in alarm when she realized that her mother wasn't gone but had hit the floor. Hitomi didn't hesitate to open the door at that moment. This Hitomi, Mr. Watashi cried in alarm as Hitomi ran out. She saw it. Her mother was being dragged along the ground by something. Mommy, Hitomi knew it was illegal. She knew she could get in trouble. But at that moment she didn't care. Hitomi extended her hand out and activated her quirk. Hitomi wasn't quirkless. Far from it, she had a mixture of her father's brainwashing and her grandmother's telekinesis. She could bring things to her, or if she really wanted to, she can fully take over someone's body without the need for a verbal response. Hitomi was using her quirk to fight against whatever had her mommy in its clutches. Her mother jerked back at Hitomi's intervention. Then they were looking at each other again. No, stay away. Her mother managed to gasp out as whatever this thing was had her leg and was fighting against Hitomi's quirk. But Hitomi didn't listen to her mother's words. She ran forward, her hand still outstretched to reach her mother's own outstretched hand. I got you, Hitomi cried as she grabbed her mother's wrist for dear life. The two of them held on to one another for just one quick second, then whatever had its hold on her mother broke free of Hitomi's telekinesis. Hitomi felt her soul leave her body. She and her mother were now both being lifted into the air. Don't look down. her mother demanded as Hitomi felt almost weightless as the ground vanished below her feet. Her mother kept an iron grip on Hitomi's wrist as they both floated higher and higher in the air towards the light itself. Hitomi saw the worry and fear etch into her mother's face the higher they floated together. Don't let go. Her mother's voice was hardly audible to Hitomi. All Hitomi could really hear was the BLD pumping into her own ears. Hitomi didn't dare look down for her own safety and peace of mind. "Mommy," she whimpered. "Look at me. Everything is going to be okay. It's all gonna be." Her mother's head slowly turned towards the light now that they were at eye level with it. Hitomi saw it as her mother's eyes reflected the light perfectly, mirroring the light and its many swirls of colors that followed it. "Okay, beautiful." Hitomi looked into the light as well, and while the lights were prettish doubted she was seeing just what her mother was. Then in the snap of a finger, they were both sucked into the blinding light. The speed was so fast that Hitomi slipped from her mother's grasp. "Mommy," she called while she free fell through the air, doing a complete flip that made her feel dizzy, and whatever had Izumi entranced she snapped free from. "Hitomi." Her mother kept her projection straight while she rushed down towards her daughter. Hitomi flailed madly while they went down through this tunnel of light. Hitomi gave a mad shriek of fear. Blackwhip grabbed her by her wrist. "I got you," her mother started to say, but was cut off when she started to wobble the same as Hitomi, and Hitomi was released by accident. "Mommy." Hitomi felt herself moving away way too fast, and then they were separated as her mother in a totally new direction. "Hitomi, I'll find you," was the last thing Hitomi heard her mother say before the tunnel faded and Hitomi found herself looking at the sky. It was dark out now despite it being morning. Only moments before Hitomi let out a scream as she went barreling toward the ground at a high speed. Maybe she was lucky, or maybe she was just blessed when she managed to hit a patch of freshly fallen snow. That didn't mean it didn't hurt. The snow still scraped her face when she hit it and slid a solid inch or two along the ground. "Erg," Hitomi groaned as she just lay there. She wanted to curl into a ball and cry. Her face was now freezing, her clothes getting soaked by the snow, and her arm hurt. It wouldn't have surprised her if it was broken. She hoped it wasn't. After a few minutes of just laying in the pile of snow, Hitomi slowly and painstakingly rolled herself over with a grunt. She looked up at the night sky and watched a shaky puff of air wisped out of her mouth. "Mommy." Her voice came out as a croak as she lay there, her head, face, and arm all hurt, scratched that her entire body hurt. There was the crunch of snow, and soon a little boy was looking down at her. The boy had to be 6 years old or younger. "Are you okay?" the boy asked, and Hitomi felt her eyes narrow a little at this. There was something familiar about this little boy. "I dunno, I got separated from my mommy." "Really? Because I could have sworn I saw you flying through the air alone." The boy had dark purple hair that seemed to defy gravity, much like her own hair. His eyes were almost black in color, and his appearance was boyish, with chubby cheeks and sparkling eyes. "Quirk accident?" the boy inquired innocently. "I think," Hitomi whispered. "I dunno. One moment I was with my mom, and the next thing I know we're being sucked into this thing, and now we're here." Hitomi didn't even try to stand, and the boy frowned at this and extended his hand for her to take. "You'll catch your death just laying in the snow. You look dressed for summer," the boy commented. "Well, it was summer." Hitomi grunted as she took his hand, and he helped her up. "Tch." Hitomi grunted in pain and curled in on herself, grasping the side that hurt. "Oh," she whined, and tears made themselves known fairly quickly. "You get your tears from your mother," her father told her once when she found herself crying over something that wasn't even that sad. "The Midoriyas are all strong criers. But hey, that's okay. It's okay to cry when you feel sad, hurt, or happy." Well, she was hurting and bad. Hitomi was trying to keep herself from crying too badly, but this hurt. It felt like someone was taking a knife directly to her ribcage. "Oh," the boy gave a soft croon of concern when it was clear that Hitomi was hurt. "Let me get my cousin, okay? He's a hero and he'll be able to help you. Stay here." Hitomi watched the little boy go and noted how it looked like he was out for a late-night playground. The best time to be at the playground, no matter what people say, Hitoshi told her matter-of-factly as he pushed Hitomi on the swings. "When she was only 5, nobody is at the playground at night, and you don't have to share anything you don't want to." "Mommy says you say that because you're nocturnal," Hitomi had told her father as he continued to push her. Hitoshi chuckled at that. "Maybe so, but she also understands. She's this way. She fell from the sky and I think she's hurt." The boy's voice cut through the air, making Hitomi try to look up, but stop when she jerked the painful spot again. All right, calm down," Shinami, a familiar voice, added, and it made Hitomi perk her head up as hope coursed through her. She didn't want to be wrong, but she was sure that was her daddy. "Shinami, I'll kill you both. I swear," Shinami screamed as he was led away in handcuffs. "I'll make sure your precious daughter watches." Weird, Shinami was clearly much younger now and clearly didn't hate her or her parents now. Sure enough, her father and Shinami walked through the bushes where she was, and Hitomi smiled, but her daddy looked different. He looked younger, like way younger. He also wasn't as big as she remembered. Both of her parents are strong, and her father made sure to keep his strength up with her mother. Why? He never said, only as a just in case, whatever that meant. Still, all of that put aside, it didn't stop Hitomi from tearing up at the sight of her father. She reached toward him. Her shoe slipped on the snow and she almost went toppling down. Thankfully, her daddy was swift and rushed. Nearly falling himself, he caught her wrist and stopped her from eating snow again. "Hitomi, Once close enough hugged him tightly. It was awful. The light took mommy, and we got separated. She sobbed into her father's neck. I don't know where she is. All right. Well, just calm down. Her father did not hug her back. Instead, he actually went to lengths to keep his hands off of her. He also sounded not disinterested but not as concerned as he should be upon learning that her mother was missing. Hitoshi then gave a gentle pat on the shoulder, a pat that said please let go. So Hitomi did and looked at her father. Her father had an eyebrow raised as he looked her up and down. Okay, let's start with the basics. Who's your mother? Huh? Hitomi felt even more confused as she scratched at her head. What do you mean? What do you mean? Her father looked just as confused as he sounded while looking at her. You seem well old enough to know your mother's name. Kid. Kid. Dad, it's me, your daughter. Her father only laughed. Kid, it's physically impossible for you to be my daughter. For one, two, I have never ever been in a relationship. Maybe I just look like your dad or something. But I am not your dad. You are my dad. Kid. Hitomi. Hitomi, if Hitoshi had a question he decided it wasn't worth it, I would have fathered you at what? 3, 4 years old. It's not possible. I can prove it. Why are you being weird? I'm being weird. Hitomi felt herself pout at this as she grabbed her backpack off of her back. Glad it wasn't lost with her mother, and she opened it. It took a few minutes, but she managed to find what? She was looking for her school ID card. Your last name is Shinsu, right? Well, so is mine. See, Hitomi Shinsu. The girl then showed him her card and he looked at it. He read the card a few times and his eyebrows rose higher and higher. I'm your daughter. You're the hero. Mind break. You have brainwashing, as do I. My mother, lest you forget her too, is Deku. Fr King Midoriya. Hitoshi gave an almost crazy laugh. No, that is literally impossible. It's not. Hitomi didn't understand what was happening. Hitoshi let out a noise and just pinched the bridge of his nose. No, it is seeing that Midoriya is also a boy. What? Hitomi has never ever yelled at her father before, but what else is she supposed to say to that? Her mother was a girl. Hitomi knew this. Yeah, Midoriya is a boy. This is weird. Shinami commented as he grabbed onto Hitoshi's hand. Should I go and get auntie and let her know you have a daughter? No, because I don't have a daughter. Hitoshi rolled his eyes at Shinami. But her mind flashed back to just less than 30 minutes ago. Her dad and her mother kissed each other goodbye and she just couldn't comprehend what was happening. Look, kid, I want to help you, I do. But I'm not your dad. Please get that through your head, Hitoshi told her, and Hitomi felt tears spring in her eyes as she frowned. I don't understand, she sniffed. Come on, don't cry, Hitoshi sighed and patted her shoulder. Look, Hitoshi rubbed at the back of his neck while looking at the sky. We're not far from UA. I guess I could take you there. Maybe we can figure things out because something isn't right here. Hitomi sniffled and wiped her eyes. UA. Will Grandpa Aizawa be there? Maybe he can figure things out. Hitoshi chortled in surprise. Maybe don't refer to him as Grandpa. Shinami, can you go back to the apartment by yourself? Let my mom know that something came up. Shinami nodded. Ade, the boy said childishly as he smiled at Hitoshi and then at Hitomi. See you at the next family gathering, he said to her. But you hate me, Hitomi whispered, and Hitoshi's eyes went wide. Now I know that isn't right. Hitoshi laughed as he put his hands on Shinami's shoulders and pulled him in lovingly the way he should be pulling Hitomi, and I think it's impossible for this little bean to hate anybody. Shinami stuck his tongue out at Hitomi before smiling at Hitoshi. I'll let auntie and mommy know. Cousin, stay safe. Will do. The little boy then rushed off toward the apartment complex across the street. Hitoshi stayed with his hands in his pocket and waited for Shinami to go inside safely. Once Shinami was inside, Hitoshi turned towards Hitomi and sucked in a slow breath. All right, come on, I'll call my teacher and we'll get this whole ordeal figured out, Hitoshi told Hitomi as he started to walk with his hands shoved in his pockets. Hitomi nodded. Yeah, figure out what quirk hit you to make you like this, Hitomi grumbled while zipping her backpack up. This made Hitoshi frown, and that made Hitomi frown, of course. She would never talk to her father like this, but it was clear, at least to her, that this wasn't her father until he went back to normal. Yeah, Hitoshi rolled his eyes because it's a quirk that made Midoriya a boy too, right? Hitomi felt herself pout again. Come on, he told her with a sigh. Let's just go. He then took out his phone and dialed a number. He then brought his phone to his ear and Hitoshi started to talk. Mr. Aizawa, I don't even know where to start. You know how I was hanging out with my cousin. Hitoshi started with a headshake and Hitomi just couldn't help herself. She grabbed Hitoshi's free hand. Hitoshi looked at her from the corner of his eye and just kept on walking and talking, explaining the situation to Grandpa Aizawa, which was good. If anybody could figure out this confusing mess, then it was Hitomi's unofficial grandpa. Izuku. Aizawa was cold and lonely. The others left him bound to the chair. Soer was in a classroom just bound to a chair. I will say it. I would have known this was gonna happen. I would have worn warmer clothing, he told Kyujo. And Kyujo grunted in understanding. I wonder if I could take Endeavor's quirk again to warm us up. 1, no 2, quirk suppressants, he grumbled to Kyujo, and Kyujo withered a bit. Lame. Izuku gave another shiver. I just want to go home. Like what even happened? I dunno. The door opened and both Izuku and Kyujo listened for the footsteps. Why are you back? Izuku asked as he looked over his shoulder at his other self. Wait, his other self was Kyujo at the other Izuku. Well, this Izuku was surprised when a blanket was wrapped around his shoulders. You look cold, the other Izuku said. It's the middle of winter and you're in your boxers and a tank top. He then put his hands on Izuku's shoulders. Well, in my world it was summer, Izuku whispered while he held the blanket tightly around his shivering shoulders. The blanket was welcomed for sure. Thank you. I can't even call you by your name because it's my name. The other Izuku smiled as he crouched down. You can call me Deku. Izuku looked at Deku in surprise. You go by that name? I do. I've embraced it and I'm trying to change the meaning. Seen Bakugo get the better of me. Deku smiled at him while crouching down. How noble. What about your world? You don't go by that name. It's a long story, one I'm not sure I should really go into right now. It's so strange we're the same person but we're not. Deku sighed as looked at Izuku. Then Izuku got a taste of his own medicine when Deku pulled a notebook out of the blue and clicked his pen anxiously. Now, if you don't mind, I have questions for you and Kyujo. Kyujo took over quickly. You can't see it, but I'm flipping you off so hard right now, Kyujo. Izuku pushed Kyujo back before shaking his head. Fire away. Fire away, he did. He mumbled and muttered like a motorboat, and Izuku couldn't talk. He does the same thing. Still, he found it easy to keep up and answer the many questions thrown his and Kyujo's way. Kyujo tried to seem nonchalant, but Izuku was sure he was loving the attention. So you're not all for one, you're your own quirk, kind of like how Dark Shadow is with Takoyami. Yeah, almost like that. I have all the abilities as all for one, but it's more than that, you see. I'm an emitter. When I take over, I make my host more powerful. No, combine that with one for all and you. One for all already makes its host more powerful, and their quirks combine two powerful emitters that make the host powerful. You'd be stronger than All Might. Ding ding. All thought when we did go toe-to-toe with All for One, we nearly died, but it worked out. Kyujo hummed as he gently touched the blanket before he looked at his lap. The thing is, All for One is your dad, but he's not my dad, Izuku whispered as he shut his notebook. I know my dad. I just had dinner with him last Tuesday. It's not All for One, as All for One is in jail. Consider yourself lucky. Kyujo grumbled. It may surprise you, but supervillains don't make good fathers. I'm sorry you went through that. Ahem. They all jumped at Nedzu's cough. Deku spun around and stood. I am so sorry. He bowed before his principal. He looked cold, and he is me, and I just wanted to be nice because I was curious. It's quite all right. I see we have the same mindset. Actually, Nedzu chuckled as he approached Izuku and Kyujo, and he placed a mug of steaming tea down before them. He then uncuffed just Izuku's hands so he could reach for the mug easily. Thank you, Izuku whispered as he pushed Kyujo back and then grabbed the mug. The mug was warm to the touch and helped his cold fingers. He sipped it, along a good choice for chilly nights. Now, young Izuku. Yes, both of them asked, and Nedzu chuckled. Oh dear, I supposed I'll have to find a different name to call you. Regardless, Midoriya. Nedzu focused on the other Izuku. I need to ask you about the dream you mentioned to All Might. My dream. Deku blinked but then nodded. In my dream, I was standing in the middle of a small circle, and when I looked around I saw there were other versions of myself. I think there were 8 in total, but one spot was blank. You were all just standing there, staring at me. Izuku put the mug down as he listened. I know for a fact I saw you. You were directly in front of me, Deku said while nodding at Izuku. That's when I walked into the dorms and saw you. I wanted you to wait. I meant you no harm. Izuku only bowed his head at this. We, Kyujo and I, were aware at that moment that something wasn't right before you came, and the others had also caught on that something just wasn't right. They were about to attack, and then you came and we fled because we knew something was wrong and we didn't want to fight, Izuku explained. I see, Nedzu hummed. I figured your appearance would have tipped them off right away that you weren't the right Izuku. I was at my mom's. Deku explained. The haircut wouldn't have tipped them off that much. But you were right, they don't even have my scars. Regardless, we're getting off topic. The dream? Izuku inquired, and Deku nodded. Right, well, there wasn't much to it. I saw the empty spot and I wondered who goes here. So I walked towards it. I got closer and closer towards it, and a sense of fear washed over me, telling me to turn around. That I don't want to know. Still I walked. I finally got to the spot, and a hand. Deku grabbed his throat with a grimace. A hand shot out of the darkness and grabbed me by the throat. They were trying to strangle me, but then I woke up, he whispered. Izuku winced in sympathy. He knew the pain of nightmares that felt so real. You swore they were. Yes, Nedzu kept his head down as he paced around. Izuku, I just need to ask. If possible, could you describe the others? Describe them? I mean, I could try. There were. Deku paused and put his finger to his cheek and thought. 2 women. I believe 1 cat and the others were men. A cat? Izuku inquired, and Deku nodded. Yeah, a big cat. Like a tiger or, no, just a house cat, but a big house cat. Nedzu gave a nod at this and a hum. A cat now. Midoriya, I need to inquire, was a little girl amongst these people of say around 13 years of age? A little girl. No, nobody looked younger than 16 from what I saw, Deku whispered. I see, Nedzu added back. All right, well, I guess I should give you the good news first. Good news, another one has been found. Nedzu cheered and then opened the door. Please, can someone just tell me what's going on? Another Izuku was walked through the door by All Might. This one looked like a cowboy. Minus the hat, he was clearly a farmer of some sort. Just by his clothes alone, he wore a green bandana around his neck and was dressed in thick winter clothing. He had what was clearly a gun strapped to his back. Is that a gun? Kyujo asked excitedly, and Izuku pulled his quirk away with a grunt. Stop it. This Izuku turned pale at the sight of two others, well, three others technically, that looked identical to him in almost every way. He took a startled step back and nearly fell into the door. This Izuku was a little different than the other two in that he was most certainly more heavy-set, looking akin to Deku's own mother than himself. What? He gasped in alarm. Hey, Izuku waved. Welcome to the club. I'm Izuku. But I'm guessing you might also be Izuku, and that is also Izuku. He jabbed his thumb at Deku. On Kyujo. The one with the red eyes. Kyujo introduced himself, and Izuku was sure this other Izuku was about to faint. What is happening? He asked as he grabbed Toshinori. I wish I could tell you, please. Come in. We're going to get this all figured out. Toshinori was gentle as he pulled this Izuku into the room gently. Toshinori then looked at Deku, and his face twinged pink for some reason. Also, congrats, Toshinori mumbled. On, Deku raised an eyebrow at his mentor. It's a girl. Seconds later, a little girl, no doubt the one Netsu was referring to moments ago, slid into the room. Mom. It was Kyujo that spoke up next. At least she's not another Izuku. What's her name, kid? The girl looked crestfallen when it seemed her mother was not in the room. Hitomi, she whispered. I got separated from my mother when the light sucked us, and she whispered and then sniffled before wiping her eyes. I found my dad. But he's not my dad, and my grandpa isn't my grandpa. While Izuku looked at Deku, and then they looked at the other Izuku. Who's your dad? It's not one of us, is it? Kyujo popped up suddenly. You know, she looks a lot like Hitoshi Shinsu. I'm Hitomi Shinsu. But he's not my dad. He is, but the one I talked to isn't. He even said my mom can't be my mom because she's a she's. It was like something struck her as she finally looked at the Izukus in the room. She wiped her eyes. I feel like I'm going to regret this. The bigger Izuku sucked in a slow breath. Who's your mother? She looks like you, she whispered while looking at all three of the Izukus. Her name is Izumi Shinsu. But let me guess, she used to be Izumi Midoriya? Deku asked, and Hitomi nodded. Oh, that's so weird. That is so weird, Izuku whispered. I mean, yeah, kinda, but at the same time, is it really? Deku asked back. I mean, I kinda had a feeling that we'd be seeing female versions of ourselves. No, Izuku yelled. I don't care that there's a female version of me. I care that there's a female version of me that had a child with my brother, who is also biologically my nephew. But that is neither here nor there. Oh, that's weird, and you just you. EW. Yeah, well, wait, Hitoshi is your nephew. Deku yelled. How is that even possible? All for one is my dad. He's mine too. The other Izuku yelled. And he's Hitoshi's grandfather. Oh, that's weird. Deku said. Wait, did you just say he's your father as well? Yeah, he's. I don't want to talk about it. The other Izuku turned away, and he then opened his glove as if to check his hand. It's not something I like to talk about. FRK him, Kyujo grunted. Hitomi huffed as she found a corner to sit in, and she sat right in it. Deku looked at Toshinori, and poor Toshinori looked like he was going to faint while Netsu was chittering. I think if it's alright with you guys, we can untie this one. Deku whispered, and Netsu then nodded. I agree, assuming you won't go on the offense again. No sir, Izuku politely said. Good. While Netsu went to unlock the chains around Izuku, Aizawa poked his head in. Toshinori, I'm going to need your help. There's another one on campus. Oh joy. Netsu laughed as he got the last look at Izuku and allowed him to stand. Izuku did stand, and he stretched as if Hitomi's mother perhaps. I would love to talk to her. Aizawa shook his head. Far from it. She's being restrained at the moment because she attacked Hitoshi. Actually, she attacked him. Toshinori asked with wide eyes. Whatever for? I'm unsure. But we can't get her to calm down. She was trying to stomp on him. I figured you'd be the best one to handle her. Toshinori sighed. Very well, young Midoriya. Both the bigger Izuku and Deku perked at Toshinori's call. Or Deku, stay here with the others. Okay. It's best you just stay put until we can find the rest. Just how many are there? If my dream was right. Not counting myself. 6. 3 down, 3 more to go. Joy. Aizawa grunted. I don't get paid enough. Izumi's Midoriya's life was hard. Being quirkless in a quirked society wasn't easy. She was often the butt of many jokes, even in UA. This was the unfortunate truth, but things are changing, and so is she. No longer is she gonna cower and let people kick her down, so better late than never. She was working hard and training with her best friend and boyfriend, Nito Monoma, to gain muscle and to try and get into the hero course in UA, as there were more than a few open spots for her to take. Nito was Izumi's very solid rock through this difficult time in her life. They met almost 4 years ago when he saved her from being jumped by Bakugo and his middle school friends. Ever since they've been inseparable because Nito knew the pain she would go through. Both had problems with making friends. Both knew what it was like to be lonely and know well. Now they had each other. Come on, sweetie. Nito encouraged her as she raised the bar over her head in a bench press. He was crouched beside her and watching just in case it went wrong. She was doing great in the last 6 months, first hardly being able to press 50 pounds. She can now press nearly 100 pounds according to Nito, who was helping her diet and helping her train. She was making great progress. Izumi was laying on the bench, the bar shaking a little as sweat ran down her face and neck, soaking the collar of her tank top. Izumi pushed the bar up above her body with a grunt. Yeah. Nito clapped his hands before he grabbed the bar from her hands and placed it back on the rack. 60 reps. A new record. He encouraged her and she sat up before standing. The two of them high-fived. Look at you. Once a twig, now getting buff. I hope it's good enough for the sports festival coming in 5 months. Izumi wiped her sweaty face off with a towel before grabbing her water bottle and drinking from it. You're doing great soon. You'll be able to punch someone unconscious, Nito told her with a grin, and she smiled at him. I'm gonna put the plates back, wipe off the bench, and then go on the leg press, she told him, and he nodded. Alright, I'm gonna be squatting the dumbbells nearby if you need me. The two of them gave one another a quick pecking kiss before they went their separate ways. As Izumi grabbed the disinfecting wipes and started to wipe down the bench. Things are looking up, she thought. For the first time in forever she felt happy. She was out from her mother's thumb, and Izumi was becoming much happier with her body and her mindset. No longer was she going to settle for a career she didn't want. She had a great support system with the monomas, and even some of Tua. Things really were looking up for the better, and she couldn't be happier. Still, that didn't mean everything was peaky keen. The doors to the gym opened. The night sky outside apparent as a student opened the gym doors. There was a heavy silence as Nito and Izumi both stared at Shinsu Hitoshi. Shinsu looked at them, then slowly backed up and shut the doors to the gym. Asshole, Izumi bitterly thought as she went back to the task at hand. You see, Shinsu, Shiro, Kaminari, and Minta were all dating girls in UA to win points, and with those points, they would make the others buy things for them. They would rank these girls, with the most attractive being goddess, and the least attractive being untouchable. Izumi was one of these girls, being Hitoshi's last victim and being deemed untouchable by their own standards because of her quirklessness. He seemed so normal. There was nothing giving this away, and Izumi may have never found out if Kaminari hadn't had angrily shoved their damning notebook right into her hands. Kaminari Denki, on the other hand, a whole can of worms. That one was he had a crush on Hitoshi, and when Hitoshi actually started showing interest into Izumi, Kaminari nearly killed her by locking her in a closet. Over the weekend he was expelled. Shinsu, Shiro, and Minta were all nearly expelled for their roles played in this as well, but it was Izumi who gave them another chance. Kinda. Izumi made them untouchable. Not only were they all kicked from the hero course and put into Gen Ed, but they were put in their own dorm away from everyone else. They were also to be taught in that dorm by a non-hero teacher. They couldn't have visitors, and they couldn't visit anybody. Not that anybody wanted to visit them. Want to turn their backs on their once beloved friends. Once they learned of the cruel acts they committed, their own homeroom teacher, Aizawa Shouta, wanted nothing to do with them. By the second week of this punishment, Shiro dropped out and moved into a public school. By the third week, Minta dropped out and moved to America. That just left one Hitoshi. Shinsu Hitoshi was holding on to this school. Maybe his parents didn't want to bail him out. Maybe he wanted to stay because deep down he knew he messed up either way. He was staying. Izumi had to give him some credit. What little there was anyways. Shinsu even found a loophole. The contract he signed said he couldn't visit people or the other dorms, while at UA it said nothing about gyms, so, in the dead of night, he was often seen walking to a gym to work out. Izumi was sure if she weren't in the gym he may have attempted to work out even with Nito in there. The issue with her being in the gym was the fact that Catherine Monoma, Nito's mother, practically forced Hitoshi to sign a restraining order. He wasn't allowed within 100 yards of Izumi, and any violation of that would kick him out of UA immediately. I think it's clean. Nito's voice made Izumi jump in alarm as her boyfriend was right there. Izumi then blinked and looked down at the bench she had been cleaning. It most certainly was clean now, with the leather shining from the wipe that was dirtied by how hard she had been scrubbing. Right, I knew that, she whispered and tossed the wipe into a nearby trash can before grabbing the plates to rack. Has he been giving you any issues? Nito inquired, and Izumi didn't need to ask just who he was. No, in fact, that was the first time I saw him so close since I outed him to Wanna, she told Nito in a soft voice as he gained weight. Nito couldn't help but give a small chuckle at her question. Maybe. I mean, if I was trapped alone in a dorm by myself with nobody else by my own thoughts and being borderline homeschooled because I fucked up so badly that the actual school quarantined me away, and my only shot at being a hero was ripped from me, I'd drown my sorrows in food as well. Izumi shook her head. I should feel happy, but I don't, she admitted to Nito. Hey, he made his bed. Nito came up behind her and put his hands on her shoulders. I know, Izumi whispered as she racked the plates. I know, and that's what makes me upset. He was like us. She turned to Nito. He had a shitty middle school experience. He was bullied and had a hard time making friends, and sometimes I wonder if just having Nedzu expel him would have been less cruel. Nito put an arm around her and pulled her into him. He gently kissed her forehead. I think you gave him just what he deserved. Izumi smiled at this before breaking away from Nito. Okay. Break time is over, she told him before going to the leg press. Nito smiled as he returned to what he was doing before they were interrupted. The rest of their workout was pretty unremarkable. In all reality, Izumi did her leg press. Then she moved on to the Stairmaster, before finishing with her own set of squats. The two of them chatted idly as they let the gym doors close behind them. Nito walked Izumi to her dorm, and she looked at the dorm with a sigh. Soon you'll be in the 1B dorms with me. he said proudly, and Izumi only gave a snort of fondness. We'll see. They shared a kiss before going their separate ways. See you tomorrow, she waved to him, and he waved back. See you tomorrow, love. Izumi turned and walked into the dorms. Those in Gen Ed that were still up smiled and waved at her, and she waved back at them before retreating to her dorm room upstairs. Izumi would change out of her gym clothes and slip into some sleeping clothes, a pair of sleeping shorts and a tank top. She took her bra off and stretched her arms up towards her ceiling. She was ready for sleep after a long day, and really she just wanted to forget about Shinsu, but that wasn't easy. She could never forget about Shinsu and what he did to her. Still, she crawled into bed and pressed her face against her pillow firmly. She rubbed her face vigorously against her pillow before relaxing. She reached to her nightstand and grabbed her eye mask, which was also Bluetooth, so it connected to her phone with the help of a therapist. She found that background noises can help silence her thoughts at night. She always went for a storm on the beach to fall asleep too. Once her video started playing, she lowered the eye mask and nestled back into her covers. Izumi tossed and turned for a while, but before too long she found herself starting to doze off while her brain began to turn off for the night. An image flashed in front of her eyes of a boy. The boy looked a lot like her. Izumi opened her eyes quickly before she decided to try again. She shivered as she wiggled under her covers, relaxed, and shut her eyes again to get some rest. A woman was in front of her. She looked identical to Izumi, only older. They stared at one another. The woman looked strong. She was wearing all black, a black hoodie, black pants, boots, and even leather gloves, yet her outfit didn't look like a hero costume. It looked too new, too freshly bought. Her face was hidden behind a mask, but her eyes, freckles, and green hair were still very visible, as were the crow's feet on the corners of her eyes and the small wisps of gray coming from her roots. She looked so friendly as she stared at Izumi with a sort of motherly joy or love. You know, I was a bet the same as you. Izumi gasped as she sat up in alarm and nearly threw her sleeping mask across the room. That she panted, her hands quaking. That just felt surreal. Taking in several deep breaths, Izumi calmed herself down as she fell back onto her bed. It was just a dream, yes, she whispered and shut her eyes. There was an explosion that shook the entire building and made the windows rattle so violently that Izumi was sure they were going to break if this kept up. A light tore through her dorm room window and made her gasp as she sat up in alarm. It was like the sun was right there blaring through her window. As she squinted, her eyes closed. A helicopter. She wondered as she waited to hear the sound of the helicopter blades retreating and for the light to go away. It never did, and the rattling never stopped either. Earthquake. Someone, Mika maybe, was slamming their fists against her door. It's an earthquake. Get outside, they yelled to Izumi. Of all the nights, Izumi grumbled while she got up and quickly slipped on some shoes, a pair of slides. She went to open her door but stopped. Something felt like it was pulling her as she turned back towards the light, towards her balcony. Against all of her natural instinct, Izumi turned away from her door and walked towards her balcony, towards where the light was. She grabbed her balcony doors and opened them and walked out. The moment she was outside, it was like something invisible grabbed her wrist quickly, and with the fastness of a whip it wrapped tightly around her wrist and yanked her upwards. Izumi gasped as she moved upwards in the air with her right arm extended and her wrist limp in this grip. She rose higher and higher as one of her slides threatened to fall off of her foot. Izumi was soon faced with this light, and she felt a weird familiarity with it as images passed through her mind, images of the same boy at least 3 times. The boy again, but a little older, a cat, and a woman, the same woman she had seen before when trying to sleep. You're beautiful, Izumi said as she stared into this light with a gasp. She was then yanked into it at a blinding and breakneck speed. Izumi felt trapped in a tunnel as she slid down. She remembered screaming, "BLDY murder, somebody help me." She turned upside down towards the opening where she was sure somebody would save her. Nobody did. Izumi slid down this slide of doom for several long and agonizing seconds before she spat out the other side. One moment she was sliding, the next she was falling. A new scream ripped out of her throat as she fell fast and hard. She fell to the ground with a gasp. Her body leaped up, and she rolled to a stop on the ground with a groan. Izumi curled into a ball on the too cold ground and grasped the shoulder that had hit the ground. Oh, she whined. Izumi was pretty sure her shoulder dislocated as she realized she couldn't move her right arm at all. It felt numb from the shoulder down. Her neck gave a small spasm and she winced in pain slowly. Oh, so slowly. She sat up and did her best to look around while ignoring the tears in her eyes. She blinked the tears away before she sucked in a breath. She looked around and felt a little relieved. She was still on the school grounds. She was just outside of the ground beta gates. Izumi hissed in pain as she had to let go of her arm to anchor herself on the gate to hoist herself up. At least I can still go to recovery, girl, she thought while she kept her grip on the wall. Izumi sucked in several quick breaths and then took her arm off of the gate wall. She used her free arm as a sling for her damaged arm for now and walked away. I'll go back to my room, she told herself while walking slowly through the grass towards dorms. She realized she had in fact lost one of her slides but didn't really care about that for now. I need my phone. I need to call President Mike and let him. She paused and winced at a spasm through her hurt shoulder. Let him know I'm okay and that I need help. Izumi was surprised at how quiet it was. Wasn't everyone freaking out about the earthquake? But now it was so quiet. Yeah, it looked like some were out and about. But did you hear someone managed to break in? she heard one girl say to her friend as they retreated back inside the dorms. It was in 1A. It's always those wanna freaks. Her friend responded with a laugh. Izumi watched them go before she continued her slow trek back to the Gen Ed dorms. A cold breeze swept by her and Izumi shivered. That breeze felt too cold. In fact, she felt too cold. Not good. I need to get my phone fast. She knew feeling too cold was never a good sign after an injury. It also didn't help that she was wearing next to nothing still. There was nobody out, no teachers, nothing. I must have hit my head and blacked out. Izumi determined herself as she continued her cold walk back to the Gen Ed dorms. She's blacked out before and never even realized it, so that means present Mike must be really worried about her. Izumi forced herself to pick up the pace back to her dorm. Finally, she made it. She unlocked the door and walked in. Her classmates were all in a crowd and talking amongst each other. Izumi almost told them she was fine, but without a second glance towards them, she let them have their conversation. She was just glad that they were okay and nobody else got sucked in like she had, so, being unnoticed, she went towards the elevator and got in. On any normal day she'd take the stairs, but not tonight. She just wanted to grab her phone, ask present Mike to open the school, and get recovery girl for her if possible. The elevator rose up and Izumi sniffled. Her left shoe was missing. She'll have to find that soon. Her toes were all cold and so were her fingers and nose. She wanted to go back to bed more than anything, but she needed this shoulder checked out. Up the elevator went, and once on her floor she walked towards her dorm door. Once she got to it, she simply opened it and walked inside without a second thought. God, that was. Izumi froze. This wasn't her room. Slowly she backed out of the doorway and looked at the room number. Nothis was her dorm. Then, where the fuck was her stuff? Everything was gone. Her All Might action figures, posters, and merch, it was all gone. Her shoes, phone, everything. Now the room was a mess with clutter all over the nightstand and desk. There were clothes everywhere on the floor. And the posters on the wall certainly weren't of All Might. The TV wasn't hers. Not even the laptop was hers. Izumi took a step back as her face felt hot. Was this all a trick? I thought. Can I fucking help you? Came a painfully familiar voice, and Izumi slowly turned to face Shinsu Hitoshi. She was wrong. Shinsu had not gained weight. In fact, he looked fine as he was leaning against his door. He had the gall to look upset at her. Excuse me, she demanded with a growl as she looked at him. Can I fucking help you? His eyes narrowed. Midoriya. He looked confused as he thought about it and then scratched his head. Yeah, you can fucking help me. Help me find my stuff before I report your ass to Aizawa. She screamed at him and he looked taken aback before his eyes narrowed even more. You need to leave. No, you're giving me back my shit and leaving. Is this how you want to go? Finally got lonely in that dorm all by yourself, so you thought you'd trick me one last time. She screamed while balling her good fist up. Trick you? You need to leave. This is my dorm. He reached for her. He actually reached for her. Izumi clocked him right in the face. Asshole. She screamed as her fist connected with his nose. Nito was right. Soon she will be able to knock a guy out with one punch. But watching as Hitoshi slammed into the nearest wall and grasped his bleeding nose with a gasp was just as satisfying. FRK. Hitoshi gasped while he pulled his hand away from his nose and smeared BLD over his face as a result. Okay, you asked for it, he growled, and Izumi tense. Ready for a fight? She never figured Shinsu would ever raise his hands to her, never, but if that's how it's going to be, then fine. Hitoshi all but screamed. Good, she screamed back before rushing him and grabbing Hitoshi by his collar. Call him. He turned his back on you. You think he's going to protect your ass after all you did? Izumi was fired up. She was mad. She was in pain. She was ungodly cold, and in this fired up state she kicked him to the ground and he fell to his side. Hitoshi let out a gasp and raised his hands up to protect himself as Izumi was going to stomp on him. She was, oh god, she was going to stomp on him hard. Thankfully, Aizawa managed to come to Hitoshi's aid just in the nick of time. Izumi let out a grunt before crying out in pain when a capture scarf wrapped tightly around her arms and she was yanked back. Jesus, she heard Aizawa breathe. Are you okay, Shinsu? Aizawa asked him. Is he okay? Izumi felt like she was going crazy. He broke into my dorm and took all of my stuff when he can't even be 100 yards near me. You're violating the restraining order, asshole. She screamed at Hitoshi. Aizawa looked at Izumi and just dragged his hand down his face with a sigh. Hitoshi Aizawa sighed and then pinched the bridge of his nose. I didn't do anything. Hitoshi yelled while he held his bleeding nose. No, I know, go to recovery girl and get that nose fixed. Let me deal with her. Yeah, tell Midoriya to get his crazy sister under control. What are you talking about? Izumi struggled against the capture scarf. I'm an only child. Just go, Hitoshi, Aizawa demanded as he gestured Hitoshi away from the situation. First that crazy kid. Now this. Hitoshi shook his head and stalked off. Izumi struggled against the binding cloth the best she could. But her bad shoulder made it nearly impossible for any kind of escape. Not that she realistically could. Aizawa turned towards her and Izumi, feeling confused and betrayed. Izumi tried to scramble away and wound up losing her other shoe in the process. Why are you taking his side? Izumi yelled and Aizawa turned towards her. He walked up to her and gently squatted down. You need to calm down. Calm down. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned was a very true statement, as it was clear that this Izuku wasn't going to calm down by any means. What's your name? She stopped answering him as she just focused on struggling against his capture scarf. It was clear, at least to Aizawa. As he looked at her right arm, he saw that her shoulder was clearly dislocated, and she looked scared as she kept her back to the wall. Her breathing was picked up, and Aizawa could see the fear and distrust in her eyes. Okay, Aizawa huffed and picked her up by grabbing his capture scarf and hoisting her over his shoulder. Let's go. Izumi was pissed. If that wasn't already obvious, she yelled and actually kicked against Aizawa. At first it was anger towards Hitoshi just being able to move her stuff and violate the restraining order, like what? But then her anger turned into a panic attack pretty quickly when she was being led into UA. What are you doing? What's happening? Why are you being like this? She remembered screaming through her tears. Her heart was racing and she was afraid she was going to pass out as she was being brought into the dark school. Was this all a big ploy? Did UA actually hate her, and this was their big plan to get rid of her and bring back Shinsu? Shinsu was Aizawa's personal student. He went to grab me. You have to understand why I punched him. She yelled, but her yelling fell on deaf ears as Mr. Aizawa stopped walking for a second and then put her on the ground. Stay here, cheeky bastard. I hope I transferred to Vlad's class, she hissed at him, and Aizawa blinked in surprise at that. They held their gazes for several long seconds. Hey, if she was going to be expelled, then she might as well go out by speaking the truth. Then without another word he just turned and walked away from her. Izumi grunted while she tried to fight against the weapon, but he got her in there tight. Izumi swallowed hard and let out several loud breaths and shivered from the cold. There was a noise before a familiar blonde poked his head down the hallway. Midoriya. Toshinori Yagi sighed as he walked up to her. My girl. He sounded like he had forced the word out of his mouth as she shook his head. All Might. I don't know what's going on, she whispered while a soft cry left her mouth. Toshinori slowly crouched down in front of her and they looked one another in the eyes. Why don't you tell me what happened? Here All Might was gentle as he untied her and helped her to her feet. Izumi gave a hiss of pain when one of his massive hands brushed past her hurt shoulder. This didn't go unnoticed as he looked at her arm. Her shoulder was swollen and inflamed. Her arm hung a little too low for her liking. She still couldn't move it, and that made her frown. Okay, we're going to get you some water and then I'll take you to recovery, girl. Not if he isn't there, Izumi yelled to All Might while she jerked her body away from him. I assume you're talking about young Shinsu. Why is he allowed back? Why was given my room? How long had I been gone for? Young Midoriya. All Might was gentle as he put his hand on her good shoulder. Listen to me, please, you don't belong here. Izumi's heart plummeted at those harsh words. Her eyes went wide and tears came quickly. What? I know it's complicated. I know it's a lot to take in, but it's as simple as that. You just don't belong here, but fear not. We're doing everything we can to find where you do belong. A noise left Izumi's mouth. She's pretty sure it was the sound of her heart breaking as tears started to pour down her cheeks and neck. Then why did you even give me the whistle if you didn't care? She screamed so loud that her voice echoed around the desolated hallway. If I don't belong here, then why help me at all by locking Shinsu away after what he did to me? Why save me from the closet? Toshinori's eyes were wide as he put his hands up in surprise. Oh my, there was a chuckle as Nedzu's voice filtered into the room. Izumi looked at the principal with teary eyes, and Nedzu just shook his head. I believe my employee may have said the wrong thing, and truthfully, I don't think it really should be said. Nedzu had his furry paws behind his back as he walked up to her. What? What else could you don't belong here mean to a quirkless student? She demanded, and Nedzu put a paw up. I am not deaf, dear. There is no need to yell. I understand that you're confused and upset, but please calm down, Nedzu told her, and Izumi opened her mouth but then shut and let her head hang. I'm sorry, she whispered softly. I'm cold, confused, hurt, and I just don't understand. I know. Nedzu patted her head as she bowed to him. Come, allow me to show you what Toshinori was trying to tell you. I couldn't help but overhear you. You said you were quirkless. Izumi sucked in a scared breath as she just didn't understand. He knew this, it wasn't a secret. Yes, sir, Izumi whispered to him while they, with Toshinori, walked your only quirkless student. I see. Nedzu shut his eyes as he thought on Izumi's words. Ms. Midoriya, what Toshinori was trying to tell you was this: you are in the wrong universe, you see. You are not my student. In fact, I don't even know your first name. It's Izumi. Izumi Midoriya, Nedzu inquired, and Izumi nodded slowly to him, the words that he told her not really hitting her just yet as she looked at the principal. The words wouldn't fully hit her until they opened the door to a classroom. There were 3 boys in there already. And they all looked identical, like they looked like triplets, except one looked older than the other 2. One boy, the one with the undercut, was resting on the floor. The one without the undercut was on the ground with his back against the wall. The final one, the one that looked older and had long curly hair put up into a ponytail that Izumi herself usually wore, he was sitting next to a little girl who was currently using him as a pillow. Izumi stared at all of them, and they stared at her. Izumi tilted her head as she narrowed her eyes. Then Nedzu's words hit her like a truck. She wasn't looking at brothers, and this was made apparent when the one with the undercut gently removed his blanket. He, like her, was in sleeping clothes, boxers, and a tank top. Izumi's eyes went wide as she went take a step back. But All Might put his hands on her shoulders. Immediately she cried out in pain and jerked away from him. She turned around and walked into the room. "Did you hurt yourself?" The older-looking one, the one that looked like a cowboy with long hair, went to stand, and Izumi saw that the girl that looked identical to Hitoshi, hadn't been sleeping but rather was just resting. She looked at Izumi, and her dual-colored eyes, one green, one purple, sparkled for a moment, but the sparkle dulled. The boy stepped to her, and the other two also stood. What is happening?" she yelled as she put her hand through her hair in shock. "I wish we could tell you," the boy with the undercut said, "but truthfully, we're just as confused as you are. I'm Izuku Aizawa." The strangest thing happened. His eyes went from green to red in a nanosecond. "Kyujo, I'm the one with the red eyes. I'm also Izuku Midoriya. Please, just call me Deku," Deku said as he grabbed her hand and led her towards a chair. "I'm also Izuku Midoriya," the bigger one said. "I don't have a nickname yet. I'm still thinking," he admitted. He said the last bit in English of all languages, but thankfully the middle school Izumi went to after she was transferred out of Aldera by the monomus taught English, so she knew it fairly well. "I'm Hitomi Shinsu," the little girl said from the wall. "You look like my mom, but I know you're not her." Izumi was sat in the chair. "Recovery girl should be here to check on you in a moment," Nedzu said. "For your own safety, we ask that you stay in here for the time being." I got Aizawa out to get some blankets and pillows for all, Nedzu told them all at the end. Izumi hissed when the bigger Izuku grabbed her arm and extended it out. Her reaction was to try and jerk her arm back, but she couldn't move it at all. All she could do was wince and bite into her own knuckles. Midoriya Toshinori noticed her discomfort but realized his flub when three Midoriyas, Izumi included, jerked their heads up towards his collar. The one from client Deku and Izumi looked down, so that just left one. "Don't do that, she's in pain." Though, he jumped a little. I never told anyone." He looked at everyone surprised. "You know, I'm surprised we never asked each other about our quirks." Izuku was gently rolling Izumi's arm as he was speaking, then with one firm push her shoulder was back in the socket. A squeal of pain left Izumi's mouth as her shoulder felt like it was lit on fire. A cold hand suddenly clamped right down on her shoulder before a warmth spread through her shoulder and her pain all but completely dissipated. A soft humming filled air, and Izumi saw a golden glow in the corner of her vision. The older Izuku's hand was glowing as he was healing her. Holy crap, he was a healer. There, he removed his hand from her shoulder and put a glove quickly on it. The leather of his glove squeaked as he pulled it down. "It should be better," he asked while he gently touched her shoulder with his gloved hands. "There's no more inflamed skin and your arm is where it should be. Does that hurt?" He added. Jace added a bit of pressure to her shoulder and it felt normal, like nothing had happened at all. "No, that's wow, your quirk is strong," she told him, and he blushed before scratching the back of his head. "You have to be a healer for heroes, right?" she asked as she twisted in her chair to look at him. "Oh no, I don't work for heroes. Nothing personal. But it wasn't anything I really sought out. Can I help you?" Kyujo was out and had stepped up to the healer Izuku to just stare at him. The sound of Nedzu clapping his hands broke up any sort of tension that was starting to arise between the two. "How wonderful. Healers are so rare. That being said, maybe don't do something like that again, not without permission, seeing how you aren't a licensed doctor." "I'm a vet," Izuku stated firmly as he adjusted his gun on his back. "A veterinarian, that is. So I do have a doctorate." "What a waste of a powerful quirk, Kyujo." Izumi was rather shocked to watch as Izuku physically pushed the air as if to push his quirk back. "Apologies, I think it's a good job to have." Izuku then bowed on his quirk's behalf. "A veterinarian at such a young age. You're 22. Vets need to have at least 8 years of schooling," Nedzu hummed as he said his thoughts out loud. "I graduated early. It was easy with my quirk. And I studied a lot. I worked my ass off to be where I am. Let's leave it at that," Izuku told the principal. "You know, that has a nice ring to it." Hitomi came up and held onto Izuku's hand. "What?" Izuku inquired while he looked at her. That could be your nickname." "That." Izuku looked a little uneasy about this, and he clearly didn't want to vocalize why. Still, after a few minutes of silence, he accepted this. "Very well, you can call me Vet if you wish." Izumi, Vet, Deku, Izuku, Kyujo, and Hitomi, a whole cast of characters for sure, but not done. Not yet. Izumi could feel it in her bones. They were still missing people. Izumi felt delayed, like the world just hadn't hit her just yet. But she wasn't freaking out. In fact, none of them really were. Maybe they didn't have the time or the energy to really do so. Aizawa would return with those blankets and pillows. The funny thing was that everyone decided to just sleep in a pile on the floor for the time being. It was cold and they were all warm. Izumi crawled next to Vet when she heard Aizawa speaking softly to the girl. "Hitomi, we got heroes out there looking for your mother." "I know," Hitomi whispered. "Here, I know it's not much, but it's one of Iri's and she doesn't play with it." "How old is Iri here?" "Old? She's 7. How old is she in your world?" 16. "Oh, that can't be right. She's gonna be a 7-year-old forever." There was a fondness in the man's voice as he told Hitomi this, and this did make Hitomi giggle a bit. "Thanks, Grandpa." There was silence before Aizawa asked, "You're looking at her a lot. She looks identical to my mom. I want to see if she'll cuddle with me. But I don't want to be weird." When she saw me, she looked angry. I don't think she's angry at you. I think she's angry at the situation she's in regardless. I probably would stay away from that Izumi for the time being. She may be your mother in your universe. But she's not from the universe she's from, Aizawa told Hitomi. Like I said, we're going to find your mother. It's also strange. What's that? I literally woke up an hour ago. Hitomi pouted a bit at this, and I have to go to bed again. Jet lag is a beach. Squirt, get some sleep. Hitomi harumphed at this, but she would walk towards Vet, someone she clearly seemed to like, and Izumi was able to see as Hitomi was welcomed with open arms by the bigger man. You're so squishy, Hitomi mumbled, and that made Vet chuckle. The door was shut and the lights turned out for the night. The outside was quiet, almost deathly quiet, and Izumi just laid there hoping when she woke up again she would awaken in her dorm with Nito waking her up to go for a jog. It wouldn't happen, but Izumi could dream. To say Shouta Aizawa was exhausted was an understatement. He had learned he wasn't suddenly a father, but that he was also a grandfather. It was a little too much for just one man to handle in one day, so he was more than happy to lay down for the night. He returned to the apartments with Yagi. The man looking as worn and tired as Aizawa felt. Night was the last thing Yagi said to Aizawa as he turned and walked into his apartment. Night. Shouta gave the lanky man a half-hearted wave before walking up the steps toward his own apartment. The moment he came up to the second floor, he was met with a whining cat. For a second he feared one of his own had somehow gotten out. But when he looked at the cat he realized no, this wasn't one of his own. This cat was a beauty if Shouta had ever seen one. A deep mossy green color with patches of black along his body. A patch of green was masking his right eye, and both eyes were the same color of green as his fur. The cat had a thick black collar. He was owned already. Hey, buddy. Shouta crouched down and offered his hand for the cat to sniff. The cat was clearly well owned because he trotted up and rubbed his face against Shouta's palm. The cat let out a meow and then trotted up to the door before turning to look. Shouta, this cat clearly wasn't his but wanted inside of the apartment. He must smell the other cats. Shouta realized he clearly belongs to someone. He's at a healthy weight, more than healthy, and he has that collar, but it's cold out there and I'm not about to leave a poor cat out in the cold. You want in, buddy? Okay. Shouta grabbed his keys and didn't see the weird look the cat was currently giving him. Shouta instead unlocked the door and opened it. I'm back. He called to his 4 cats. Instantly his 4 gremlins all jumped on the table and let out loud wails for food. There was Vader, yes, named after the Star Wars character, a pure black fluffy Tom who was nothing like his movie counterpart. Gremlin, a beige and black Siamese she-cat with ears way too big for her body, and her face looked like it was squished in a door one too many times, being way too thin. Dusty, a dusty brown tabby she-cat. And finally, there was Drake, a silvery Tom made of pure muscle and looked like he could bench press a whole child if he understood basic commands. The newest addition. Shouta will look for an owner tomorrow, or maybe he'll just take that collar off. One of the two went low with his ears far back and his green eyes wide. I brought a friend, he told the other cat, who immediately took an interest in the green cat. Drake jumped down first and walked up to the new cat. The green ragdoll started to bristle, his tail going big and puffy as the fur along his spine made him look bigger than he already was. The cat then looked at Shouta, those green eyes almost pleading with him. There was something familiar about those eyes. But Shouta was exhausted, so he started walking away. You guys get acquainted, I need to shower, and he walked away. For the green cat, Pistachio, once known as Izuku Midoriya, things just felt crazier and crazier. His life didn't matter at the moment, not now. All you need to know is that he was once Izuku Midoriya, and now he was Pistachio. Pistachio is the beloved immortal cat, an unofficial member of Wana. He was also Hitoshi Shinsu's best friend and emotional support animal. He used to be Moss, but Moss was dead and buried, the same as Izuku Midori. So now he was Pistachio. And before all of this, Pistachio was having a really nice cat nap outside, sunning himself on a rock in the nice warm spring as he slept outside of the dorms. Then a light broke through the sky, sucked him in. And now it's suddenly cold, night, and winter, so Pistachio did what he did best. Once he landed in the snow just on the outskirts of UA, he went to the apartments to make sure everyone was okay. He did think it was weird that Shouta kept referring to him as buddy, but now he was even more confused. Pistachio didn't know what was happening as he looked at all of the cats looking back at him. Finally, he spoke. He had intended a nice and calm question, but that's not what left his mouth. Who are you guys? He demanded as he backed away against the door. Who are we? The black Tom asked as he looked at the others. Who are you? You don't live here. Yeah. The Siamese cat snorted towards Izuku. This is our house. The brown tabby started to bristle and Izuku got down as he gnashed his teeth together. Daisy. The gray Tom, Drake, as he was the only one to introduce himself so far, broke the situation up. It's clear that the human brought another stray home. Stray, I live here. Pistachio yelled as his confusion just continued to grow as he jumped up and down in front of the silver Tom. Where's Pumpkin? Brine, Brat, Tinnitum, Jelly, Izuku demanded, and those looking at him just looked as confused as he felt. Who? Drake inquired, and Izuku puffed his cheeks out in a pout. What is going on? He demanded again before he just snorted. Thankfully, Shouta never took long showers, and by the sound of it, Shouta was already done. Forget it. He huffed towards the others and took off for the main bedroom. Pistachio looked around the apartment and things were different. There are almost no pictures hanging on the wall. None of Oboro, Hisashi, and himself, none of Iri or Hitoshi. None. This felt wrong. Pistachio picked up the pace down the hallway and looked up at Shouta. Shouta was looking inside a bedroom, and Izuku lifted his head up and sniffed. He perked his ears up when he realized he was smelling Iri. So how long was he gone for? Shouta shut the door and then turned around. He looked down and looked at Pistachio. Oh hey, make friends already? Shouta asked and put his hands in his pockets. Izuku just tilted his head and Shouta leaned down before gently patting Pistachio's head. Well, I'm going to bed. The litter box is in the bathroom. Then he stood up and walked away. Pistachio's jaw dropped as he watched Shouta go. What is happening? Pistachio thought, completely confused. There was a silence as Izuku looked around the apartment and then back at the other cats who were all watching him in their own confusion. Izuku looked back toward Iri's room and then toward Shouta's room. Bedroom door was wide open and Shouta was already laying in bed. Izuku's ears went back as he marched into Shouta's bedroom. There was no massive-sized bed made to fit three, but rather a queen-sized bed. There was none of the liveliness Pistachio was used to. In fact, Pistachio raised his head and took in a big sniff. He didn't smell Oboro at all, nor did he smell Hisashi. But Hisashi's scent was around, just not as strong as it should be. It almost seemed like Shouta lived alone. Pistachio's ears twitched again while he patted inside of the dark bedroom. Shouta was on his side but not sleeping. Not yet. As he just laid down, Pistachio looked up at the bed, wiggled his butt, and jumped onto the bed. Immediately Shouta turned onto his back and lifted his head a little to look at Pistachio. Hey, buddy, lonely? Shouta inquired as Pistachio started to trek across Shouta's body. Shouta gave soft hisses as Izuku stepped on the softer parts of his body. Once he was on Shouta's chest, Pistachio sat down rather bluntly, which made Shouta go, oh. In surprise, you're a heavy one. Izuku's ears went back. He never once broke eye contact with Shouta as he reached up and activated his translator collar. The translator was made by Hatsume and was given to Pistachio as a support item as he was in the hero course. After all, it just follows his sound waves. As it turns out, he is talking but in another language. Shouta's eyes went wide when the side that Izuku pressed turned a bright orange and illuminated a small area around them. Izuku's collar sprang to life and a muzzle-like apparatus moved in front of his mouth. It almost looked like Hitoshi's own voice changer as it was inspired by. What the hell? Shouta whispered softly in surprise, but Izuku cut him off. Why is everything wrong? Pistachio inquired. Shouta's eyes stayed wide as he stared at Pistachio. What? Why is everything wrong? Izuku repeated while his tail whipped from side to side. Where is Hisashi? Oboro, the other cats. Oboro. Shouta grabbed Pistachio from under his arms and sat up as he stared at the cat dead in the eyes. What are you? Who are you? Pistachio felt his own eyes go wide as his ears went back and he snorted. It's me, Pistachio. I'm Hitoshi's cat. I've been living with you, Oboro, and Hisashi for years now. Hitoshi, and Iri. Shouta looked at Pistachio up and down before he simply put the cat down, turned towards the edge of the bed, and sighed. Let me guess, you're Izuku Midoriya. He grunted while rubbed his temples with his fingers. It looked like he was giving himself a deep massage as he tried to stave off a migraine. Pistachio sat and curled his tail around his legs. I used to be. What does that mean? Shouta looked at him with an incredulous gaze. His brows were furrowed and his confusion apparent. Izuku huffed a little as he made himself into a loaf on the bed. Izuku Midoriya is dead, but I am him. Technically, it's this quirk of mine, the quirk or curse of rebirth. If I die, I come back. I can pick to be anything I want to be in my next life, but I always come back, always. Shouta only gave another sigh. Oboro is in your universe. Pistachio whispered as his ears perked in surprise. Isn't it obvious? You don't belong here. Kid Cat. Izuku. Shouta turned away from him. There are 4 others that don't belong here and we're still searching. You're number 5. Who are they? They're all Izuku Midoriya, except for one, but I think she really wasn't supposed to be here. Shit, hearing a cat curse was surprising for Shouta, but he let it pass. Not exactly what I like to hear, Pistachio whispered as he unloafed himself and stood. I hope Hitoshi is okay. Granted, he wasn't near me when the light came down and grabbed me. For that I'm glad, but I've only ever been so far from him. Do me a favor. Yes, don't go near this Hitoshi, at least not tonight. That boy has been through enough. Is Hake? Shouta chuckled and laid back into bed as he put his hands over his eyes. His chuckling sounded more sad than happy. The boy became a father and found out his baby mama from another universe hates him. He is far from okay as you can get. Pistachio listened to those words. He took in a deep breath and before sighing out, sounds like he needs some emotional support. Pistachio tried to make a break for it, but Shouta was faster and snatched him by the middle. Absolutely not. I will put you in a carrier until morning. Pistachio's ears went back as he went limp in Shouta's arms. Fine, but where are the others? I know Iri is here. I can smell her. What about Hisashi? Or Oboro? 1. Hisashi is a friend, not a lover. Keep telling yourself that. 2. Oboro is dead. The air went quiet at those words as Pistachio just looked up at Shouta. I'm so sorry for your loss. Shouta snorted and put Pistachio on the bed. Let's change the subject. If you aren't Izuku, then what's your name? Pistachio. No, seriously. Another pregnant pause between the two, then he rolled his eyes. I used to be called Moss. If you like that name better, I wouldn't mind. Moss, I do. Moss it is then, Moss said as he tipped his head. Shouta crawled back under his covers and sighed while he got comfy. I would like to see the other versions of myself, that is. Tomorrow. Please, I can only take so many Izukus in one day. Moss nodded in understanding as he padded up beside Shouta and laid next to him. Good night, Dad. Izuku mewed before turning his translator off and retracting the regulator away from his mouth. Don't, whatever, Shouta grumbled and then shut his eyes. Just get some sleep. Moss didn't really sleep. He couldn't. So instead he stared at the window outside. A different universe, different versions of myself. Not what I thought would be my next adventure after Nice's downfall, but I'm going to come home. Don't you worry for too long, Hitoshi. I'm coming home one way or another, or my name isn't Pistachio. He vowed. It was a promise he made to himself and a promise he was going to keep. It was the smell of cooking food that roused Izumi from her slumber. Izumi woke with a sharp gasp when at first she had no idea where she was, and then she remembered what had happened last night. She accidentally caused a chain reaction. Unfortunately, her gasp caused the others to wake with their own gasps, thinking they were being attacked. Izuku actually leaped in the air and got into a fighting stance. His eyes red, showing that Kyujo was out and watching. Bet rolled quickly and scrambled to his feet and grabbed Hitomi, who let out a cry of alarm. He wrapped her in a bear hug and backed away while looking around frantically for any threats. Deku, like Izuku, had leaped to his feet and was ready for a fight. They had all thought they were being attacked and were ready to fight if needed. When none were found, all eyes were on her. I'm sorry, Izumi yelled frantically as she stood and started to bow repeatedly. I forgot where I was for a moment. Forgive me. She must have bowed over 50 times in just 10 short seconds. Geez, Kyujo grumbled as he put his hand on his face, and then when he dragged his hand down, it was Izuku again, just by the eye color. Forgive him. Kyujo isn't a morning person. Are you okay? Izuku inquired as he stepped up to Izumi. He was gentle as he fixed her tank top, one of her straps having rolled down her shoulder. Then he stepped away with his hands up. I'm fine, she whispered. Deku gave a sigh as the others visibly relaxed as well. I thought it was a dream, Vet whispered while he stretched his arms over his head and then cracked his neck. Me too, Izuku mumbled while pinching the bridge of his nose. I hope the others are okay. They were all outside with me. Rody, Vet gasped, and that immediately got Deku's attention. You know Rody's soul? Deku inquired happily. Bet opened his mouth, but then stopped and put his hand up. Okay, I think it's time we all had a talk. We haven't talked about our quirks at all, nor our backstories. Clearly there has to be something binding us all together, right? So, let's all just sit down and talk. As soon as he finished speaking, the door opened. Good morning, Nezu chirped as he walked into the room, and everyone turned to look at him. Izuku, Deku, and Izumi all bowed in respect. Hitomi did so once seeing this, but Vet hadn't. If Nezu noticed, he didn't care as he walked in with Long Crush and a few other teachers, the teachers all holding trays of food. Oh my gosh. Midnight immediately gushed as she set her tray down and rushed to Izumi. You are adorable, she breathed while kneading Izumi's face in her perfectly manicured hands. Thank you, Izumi whispered, sounding relatively starstruck. Oh, I got so many things I can do to you. Think of the makeovers. Midnight pulled her into a side hug, which was awkward as Izumi's head was planted right next to the X-rated hero's melons. I hope you guys don't mind, but a few teachers were curious, Nezu told them as Vlad walked up to Vet and took him in. How strange, Vlad whispered while he gently lifted Vet's arm up to take him in all in. And you're older than your clumsy counterpart over there. Rude, Deku huffed and put his hands on his hips. Vlad ignored him. Mike was the next to come in. The man put his tray down and immediately honed in on Izuku. They just stared at one another for a few seconds before boo. Kyujo came out suddenly and Mike jumped back. Kyujo laughed and Izuku roughly pushed his quirk back. Izuku huffed to his quirk and Kyujo tutted at this. Apologies, Uncle Mike. Uncle Cockatoo Hizashi. Izuku must have looked like Izumi with how much he was bowing. To his surprise, Hizashi laughed. It's all good. I'm glad to see your quirk is clearly in good spirits if he wants to prank people. Kyujo stuck his tongue out this before being forced to retreat again by Izuku. Aizawa was the last and he walked in. No tray, but he did have a cat here. He put the cat on the ground. He came to me last night. He's one of the ones you're looking for. Oh, the cat, Nezu said as he clapped his furry paws. That just leaves Hitomi's mother and the last Izuku. You couldn't have warned me one of them was a cat, Shouta demanded while he turned to Nezu. Nezu grinned. Must have slipped my mind. Shouta only growled. All of the Izukus and Izumi crouched down in sync as the cat approached them. For several long moments nobody spoke as they just stared at one another, and the cat stared right back at them. Leave it to Kyujo to break the silence. Yep, it's a cat all right. The cat jumped when Kyujo made himself known. Kyujo grinned, and even though Izuku was trying to fight him, Kyujo took control and his hair became white and straight as the air around him became terrifying, and that made the cat start to shake. What's the matter, kitty? Kyujo asked as he took full control. The cat ran to the corner, his fur fluffed out, eyes wide and ears down. All eyes were now on him. Unaware of how several of the teachers were now getting into a fighting stance, Kyujo That's enough, I'm not doing anything, Kyujo told his other self as he took another step towards the cat. That's enough. Vet put himself between Kyujo and the cat, his stance hard. They stared at one another and Kyujo saw it, the tremble in Vet's hand. Are you scared of me? Kyujo inquired while keeping the smile on his face. Well, I'm not a fan if that's what you're asking. Vet spoke the truth and that wiped the smile off of Kyujo's face fairly quickly. In fact, at the moment, I think I can speak for everyone when I say none of us are. Vet crossed his arms tightly over his chest as he said this. Hitomi came up to Midnight and grabbed the hero's shirt. Midnight was unbothered as she patted Hitomi's wild hair. Deku licked his lips and looked nervous, but it was clear as he was pacing he was watching Kyujo's every move. Izumi hunched in on herself a little before she opened her mouth to speak. She looked a little torn as she spoke, but it was clear she meant her words. Come on guys, I don't think he means harm. I mean, if he did, he wouldn't have let us rest peacefully last night, would he? Kyujo stared at Vet with a level gaze as he rubbed the inside of his cheek a little and looked at the others, along with the teachers, all of which looked ready to pounce should Nezu give the word. His eyes landed on Izuku, who had his hands on his scarf. I can't wait to go back to my world, Kyujo sighed before he retreated back inside of Izuku. Izuku sighed as he put his hand to his face. Once he was given full control, apologies on his behalf. I'll try and keep him wrangled a little more, Izuku said as he couldn't meet anybody's eyes, and he crossed his arms over his chest while his face looked a bit pained. Well, no more distractions. We brought you all breakfast. It's for your safety that you should all try and stay in this room a little longer. Nezu clapped his furry hands one again. Izuku found the nearest chair and sat. His eyes suddenly became distant as the light left them and it became clear that he must be talking to Kyujo. Vet turned away and crouched down. It's okay, Kitty, he whispered to the cat as he extended his hand towards the cowering cat. The cat still seemed a little hesitant as he wasn't leaving the corner he had tucked himself away in. Their food was left on the trays, and eventually the teachers would leave. Midnight saying that she'd be back with a makeup bag after a while. Everyone grabbed a plate and some chopsticks to eat, except for Izuku. He stayed seated, just staring a faraway stare. While the others ate, Izuku went into the back of his mind. He found Kyujo sitting on the ground throwing fake rocks that would clatter away and vanish. Kyujo had his knees to his chest and was clearly pouting as he threw another rock. If you've come here to scold me, save it, Kyujo huffed as he looked at Izuku. Izuku sat next to Kyujo and sighed. They're not used to the air you carry around you when you come out fully. Also, don't forget, we're not the only ones traumatized by all for one. Vet is traumatized, and judging by the cat's face, I'd say he was as well, Izuku told Kyujo as he pulled his quirk into a sideways hug and Kyujo kept the pout on his face. Sucks, he grumbled. You just need to work on yourself. Izuku's nose was grabbed and Kyujo pulled him down so they face to face. You don't think I know that? Kyujo demanded rather bitterly before he let his host go. You don't think I've been working on it? And he threw another imaginary rock that would clatter away into oblivion. That Vet has some nerve though. To be fair, you were approaching a cornered animal, Kyujo. You can't do that. That cat would have sprung on you if it felt threatened enough, and don't forget that cat is us. I know you saw those eyes and fur color. He absolutely would have attacked. If anything, Vet did you a favor and you should be thanking him. Kyujo pouted again. Tusk was the noise he made before he threw another rock. I know you're scared. I know you want to go home. You think I like being in whole nother universe. I don't. Kyujo sighed at Izuku's words and put his knees tighter to his chest. I'll try and be less abrasive. Try, that's no promise. You know how I like chaos. Trust me, I know. Izuku smiled as he stood, and trying is all I can ask of you, Izuku told him as he put his hand on Kyujo's head. Tell that Vet to watch himself. Izuku chuckled before he retreated away. He blinked a few times and immediately felt pressure in his lap. He looked down and saw a tray of food in his lap. Hitomi sitting next to him, eating happily while she kept one hand on the tray to keep it from slipping off of Izuku's lap. Thank you, he told the little girl, and Hitomi nodded. She let go of the tray when Izuku grabbed it and started to eat. Izuku and Vet were talking to themselves about Rody and their experiences with him. Whoever that was, Izumi was sitting by herself with the cat choosing her lap to sit, and she would feed the cat pieces of her breakfast. Despite what transpired moments ago, the air became lax again, and Izuku allowed himself to relax as he started to eat. The heroes are working to get us home. I know they are. I just hope it's soon. Who knows how the time system works? One day here could 1 week in my universe. For all I know. Izuku looked out the window at the snow that was lazily falling outside. Then an idea struck him as he looked at Deku. Hey, Deku, I don't mean to interrupt, Izuku called, and Deku looked over at him. Yes, what is it? Deku asked as he took small bites of his food. Is there any ways I could borrow some of your clothes? I can't just stay here in my boxers, especially in winter. Deku blinked before nodding. You do have a point, and it does seem like we may be the same size, so it shouldn't hurt. But Nezu told us to stay put for our safety, Izumi argued as Deku stood. True, but here's the thing, I actually go to this school. My friends won't be shocked to see me, Deku told her. I'll be just a moment, and while I know we aren't the same size, would you like a set of clothes? He asked her once he was in front of her. Izumi looked at her sleeping clothes, and her face twinged a slight pink before she nodded. If possible, please, and thank you. Anybody else? Deku inquired as he looked at everyone. Nobody else needed clothes as Vet was already in winter clothing. Hitomi was dressed for school as is, and the cat was well a cat. I'll be quick. Good. And when you come back I think we need to have that talk, Vet said softly as he ate the last bit of his food. Agreed, Deku nodded before he quickly left. Once Deku was gone, Izumi looked at the cat. So, what should we call you? We can't call you Izuku. We have too many As's, she told the cat as she patted it. The cat then reached up with his paw, patted his collar, and the thing sprang to life, making everyone jump as it made a sort of muzzle around his mouth. You can call me Moss. The cat ox. The bar was gone. That didn't surprise Izuku. He knew where the others would be hiding. When Izuku opened the doors to the Liberation Army, he couldn't say his welcoming was warm. That was fine. They tried and they lost. It was as simple as that. Izuku walked past the bodies that littered the floor as he smiled. All 10 of his fingers pressed together as he approached Tamura. Shigaraki, we meet again, Izuku said to the man. The rest of the LOV were all standing beside Tamura. Dabai's hands were glowing blue, but he didn't attack. He didn't dare. What is the meaning of this? Tamura growled as he started to stand, but Izuku used telekinesis to push the man back down into his throne. No, don't get up, Izuku told him with a grin. Tamura gasped as he was forced to sit and stay. I like what you did with the place. More efficient than what I did, Izuku told him. Of course, what I did was, well, what you just saw. Izuku grinned a crazy grin as he pointed back at the pile of bodies and gore behind him. God, it felt so good to do that all again. What are you talking about? Are you older? Izuku knew he must have looked insane, his different colored eyes glowing as he wore his favorite suit for this special occasion. That's right, we're enemies in this universe, aren't we? Well, let me let you in on a little secret, Tamura, I'm not your Izuku. What? This makes total sense. This makes no sense at all, Twice whispered as he shook his head. Dabai was slyly texting on his phone and Izuku used telekinesis to bring the phone to him. Texting hawks? Izuku asked as he taunted Dabai with his own phone, and Dabai showed some emotion. Surprise, little hawky hawks, you wanna know what I did to him in my universe? I tore his wings right off of his back without a care in the world, Izuku said while grinning. What are you? Toga asked. You aren't my Izuku. Izuku grinned at her as he crushed Dabai's phone in his palm with little to no effort. You can call me all for one, and I'm now the one in charge. Izumi Shinsu was not an idiot when she and Hitomi got separated and Izumi was thrown out of the sky. She knew something happened. She knew she wasn't where she was supposed to be. The first thing that tipped her off was that it was cold, too cold for summer. And the second being that it was dark. There she was upside down looking up at the sky, the world seeming to be in slow motion while Musutafu continued to operate below her. She had regained her senses in the nick of time as she continued to fall from the sky like a rejected angel from the heavens. Izumi flipped herself upright, and just before she were to hit the ground she activated float, thus stopping her from breaking all of her limbs with a satisfied noise leaving her mouth. She slowly floated the rest of her way to the ground and landed with ease. Izumi gave a satisfied huff once she landed, and she put her hands on her hips before she looked around. Izumi was skeptical as she recognized the streets. The Pop Rocks agency shouldn't be far from here, but something is telling me that it's not going to be there. The Pop Rocks agency was the agency Bakugo and Kirishima made together after they had gotten married. Everyone in 1A and 1B all worked there together despite if they were daylight heroes or underground. While she walked, Izumi pulled her phone out from one of the compartments on her suit. It made her frown when she saw the screen. It wasn't bricked or even cracked, but the screen was glitching, something horrible. She tried to turn it off and back on, but it wouldn't even bring up the option to turn off, so she turned the phone over, opened the case, and then took the battery out. Izumi shivered as the cold started to seep into her hero costume. This wasn't her winter costume, and now she was cold. She watched as her breath left her mouth in puffs and looked about the area. Snow was on the ground and the sidewalks were freshly salted, most definitely winter. Izumi popped the battery in her phone and put the case back on. Though the phone was still glitching by flashing wild colors at her. She huffed at this and opted to take the battery out permanently for the time being. I'll get a burner and try Hitoshi's number though. Like with the agency, she had a feeling the call wasn't going to connect through. Still, Izumi could only try while also keeping a lookout for Hitomi. She could only pray her daughter was safe and not in the hands of whatever villain brought them here. Izumi turned the corner towards where the agency should be, and as she suspected, it was not there. Instead, in its place was an apartment building. Izumi stepped on the ground as she put her hand on her hips. She just stood there for several minutes. With her hands on her hips, she knew her next move should be to find Hitomi. But finding her daughter was going to be like finding a needle in a haystack. Without a doubt, Musutafu was massive. I could check Yue. She knows to go there if she's in danger. So that was Izumi's original plan. As she walked along the cold and dark streets of Musutafu, she popped her rabbit ear hood up to keep her face hidden. Izumi huffed out another puff of air from her mouth and watched it collect in front of her eye before dispersing. As she walked by a grocery store, she passed by a newspaper dispenser. She stopped immediately and backed up. She just wanted the date, if anything that could help her. Izumi blinked when she read the date in the corner. Then she blinked again just to make sure she wasn't going crazy. I'm in the past yet. She rubbed at her face in anger. Being the past would explain the phone glitching, as her phone hadn't been invented yet. The thing was, if it was just her, Izumi wouldn't be in such a panic. Her daughter was also in the past, which could be bad, so Izumi turned and picked up the pace to UA. She debated using a bit of one for all to speed things along. If Hitomi goes to UA and Hitoshi, or God forbid I find her, it could change things. While yes, her and Hitoshi were close around this time, it wasn't good for Hitomi to be here. Izumi and Hitoshi were still mentally unwell, Izumi the most as she was. Izumi put her hand to her eyes as a bitter taste rose into her throat as the memory of Fujiwara flashed in her eyes. Her rapist. Hitomi had no clue, of course she didn't. She and Hitoshi decided it was best to keep that aspect of Izumi's life a complete secret until Hitomi was older and could understand. There was a lot about her parents that Hitomi didn't know in all reality. Hitomi didn't really know much about Hitoshi's family because, well, there was almost nothing pleasant there. The only thing she did know was Chinami, but that's because the bastard had gotten the jump on them. Yes, Izumi and Hitoshi both shelter their daughter, but when you grew up how they had it felt worth it, at least to them. Let her still be a damn kid. A scream made her stop and twist around. The scream sounded fearful, like someone was hurt. But at first, she didn't see anybody. At first, from a nearby alleyway between two currently closed businesses, a man came stumbling out of the alleyway. It was clear he was bleeding and bruised as he let out a scared cry. I'm sorry, man. The stranger tried to plead with whoever was chasing him. Sir. Izumi came jogging up the man, but from the alley was a blur of black, a blur with a baseball bat. This blur brought the bat down right between the man's shoulder. This was just a kid, clearly no older than 16. But he was smart. He was wearing a hoodie that, if Izumi looked close enough, yes, it was an All Might hoodie. The one with the rabbit ears to stimulate All Might's iconic hair. But it looked like it was dyed, or whoever this kid was tried to dye it a maroon color. The issue was that the dye job was blotchy and thin, and the hoodie could still be seen as an All Might one. His pants were black and grungy, like the kid hadn't washed them in some time. Izumi looked at his shoes and saw that he was wearing the exact same shoes as she was, red quirkless shoes. It's what you fucking get. An unforgiving voice yelled before the assailant raised the bat again. Izumi reacted quickly and used Black Whip to grab the bat, but give the kid some fucking credit. He had one hell of a grip as he spun towards her and kept his hold on his bat. Hey, these hands are rated E for everyone, you busybody. The boy argued with her. Woman or not, I'll bust his skull. Yeah, well, I'm a hero, she argued as they played tug-o-war with the bat. It wasn't a lie, she was a hero, and even in this age she was a hero in training. Bullshit, the kid argued while he continued to pull on his bat. He was actually starting to scoot towards her, showing that while his grip was strong, Izumi was still stronger than him. With Black Whip on her side, I know every hero there is in these parts. There ain't no way you a hero. I can see you never learned proper grammar, young man. Young man, God, she was getting old. Oh, bite me, you wanna be. Let go. Well, at least the man got away, the one the boy was attacking. He got to his feet and scrambled as fast as he could. The boy and her still continued, with Izumi yanking with Black Whip as hard as she could. I am a hero, she finally yelled, a pro hero, and you better knock this off now and I might let you go with a warning. Oh, a warning? Is that you admitting you have no damn power? Izumi felt her face tick. This kid was getting on her last nerve. While he was facing her, she was able to see a bit more of his outfit, namely, his face. What she could see, he wore a facial mask, one made of cloth. It was black and it covered all of his lower face, and he wore thick goggles. These goggles were tinted red so she couldn't see in, but he could see out just fine. He was doing everything to hide his identity. I do have power. Izumi was just in reach of the bat and she grabbed it, but at the same time the boy grabbed it and they were right back where they started in a game of tug-of-war. Give it, she yelled while she pulled against him. Izumi did not see the smirk on this boy's face. Then he let go, making her fall back from her own power. With a gasp she hit the ground. The boy then turned his heel and yelled, I hope you didn't run far, you bastard. I'm coming for you. And he took off after the man. Izumi scrambled to her feet and took off after the boy. She used one for all to give herself a boost. The boy clearly didn't expect this as she tackled him to the ground. That's enough. You can't go around terrorizing people, Izumi yelled and was met with teeth sinking into her arm. You ain't no hero. You don't have a say, the boy vehemently yelled at her. While the two of them struggled on the snowy ground, the boy thrashed against her and Izumi reached up with her free hand while he continued to bite her other and grabbed his hood. The fabric bunched under her hand. She could feel his hair on the other side. She was careful not to pull at his hair. Yeah, well, let's just see who you are under this hood then, she demanded as she yanked the hood down. His hair was the exact same wild green as hers. The boy growled and smacked her directly in the face with his hand. It wasn't a gentle smack either, and it was more than enough to stun her for just a moment. I warned you, he screamed before he scrambled to his feet once again. Izumi grabbed his ankle with both of her hands and yanked him right back down, making him smack the ground with a resounding oof. Well, this boy responded by kicking her right in the face with other foot. Get off, he demanded as he went for another kick. Izumi yanked him towards her, under her, and she was sure the boy looked stunned when she straddled his hips between her legs. Well, this is a first, but sorry lady, I'm gay and taken. Izumi reached between his eyes and yanked those goggles off of his face with one hand and pulled his mask down with the other. It's what she feared. She was staring at her face but not. You creep. The boy hooked one of his legs on her hip and Izumi was quicker this time as she jumped back off of him, using one for all to make a gust of wind. This sent the snow flying around them. As she did this, she stood in front of him, breathing heavily as boy got to his feet and sneered at her. Izumi just put her hands up as she backed up a step. How is this even possible? She whispered slowly to the boy. What? You're getting your ass handed to you by a teen. It's very possible. You think the bat is the only weapon I keep on me. The boy but not quite, pulled a knife off of his person and held it with the blade pointed towards his wrist. And Izumi reached up slowly and pulled her own mask down. How is this possible? She asked, and the boy's eyes widened. Mom, what? No. Izumi chuffed at this. Who are you? The boy made a sour face as he put his hood back over his head. Just call me Athos. Athos. Let's see. Izumi kicked the snow a little as she put her hands on her hips and looked at the sky. That is not a hero costume. You go through great deals to hide your identity. You carry an arsenal on you. I'd say you're either a villain or a vigilante. Which is it? She crossed her arms over her chest as she asked this. It's not vigilantism if you don't have a quirk. Ah, that age-old line, Izumi said with a nod. I'm going to take a wild stab in the dark. Let me know if I'm right. You were minding your business when a light broke through the sky and dragged you through. Athos blinked at this as he stared at her. Yeah, pretty spot on actually. I just figured I was blasted forward in time, but man, where am I if I'm Elm? Who are you exactly? I'm pro-hero Deku. No, seriously. Well, regardless, you aren't a woman, at least not here. Izumi scratched her head. Schly, you see. I thought I was blasted to the past, but if I'm not in the past and you're not in the future, then where are we? Athos thought about it as he shook his head. Well, we could run by UA. A little risky in my opinion. While UA would be the safer place. Undoubtedly. Would they understand? Would they just lock them away? Think they were toga or outliers? Oh no, Athos laughed. I meant to stake out UA. Stake out? UA is the most guarded school in the nation. Izumi started and Athos laughed. I know a spot, but it would probably be best if we wait until morning, and you should probably ditch all off that. Athos simply gestured towards her and Izumi looked down at her outfit with a frown. But my daughter is still out there. I can't rest until I find her and know she's safe, Izumi told Athos. Athos simply walked and grabbed his forgotten bat off the ground. The bat was pure aluminum and swung fast and hard. No doubt he twirled the bat in his hand a few times. Do what you want, Athos told her before he threw the bat over his shoulder and smiled. Izumi saw he was missing a tooth, but at least take my advice and ditch that getup for the time being. I'm going villain hunting before laying down. Which, by the way, you owe me a criminal. That guy you let run. He tried to rob a gas station. Izumi snorted yet again. Where are you going to sleep? Maybe we could meet up again. I'll find you. Then he was gone. He vanished into the shadows of the alleyway and Izumi nearly went chasing after him, but stopped herself. Mama is coming, Hitomi. Hold tight. That was all that happened last night. Izumi did not find her daughter, but what she did find was that despite her phone not working, that didn't stop her bank card from allowing her to withdraw from the ATM machine. Oh God, please don't let me be robbing someone by using this card, she remembered thinking. She used that money to buy a series of things. Maybe Izumi took inspiration from Athos as she wore a black hoodie, black pants, combat boots, and a facial mask that covered her entire face. She was missing the goggles, but that was fine. She also used that money to stay a hotel when it became clear she wasn't going to find Hitomi. She did not sleep. She couldn't. Her nerves wouldn't let her. So, Izumi sat there in that hotel feeling panicked. It was right when the sun was rising. Did she rush for her door to try again in the daytime? However, when she opened the door, Athos was already waiting for her. I told you, he told her when he saw her bewildered face. I'll find you, he finished. Let's go. For Deku, getting some extra clothes was easy, maybe a little too easy. In hindsight, classes were going, so he didn't think too much on it. He grabbed 2 sets of clothes and then rushed back without being noticed. Or so he thought. Deku hurried back to the classroom, using a small bit of one for all to help aid him still. Before he went into the room, he looked around. Nobody was around, and Deku went back into the room. He smiled to the others as he raised the clothes up and then gave one set to Izumi and the other set to Izuku. Thank you, Izuku bowed. Thank you, Izumi chirped while she also bowed in respect. Then came the problem. While Izuku was able to dress just fine in a white t-shirt that said yoga pants on it and blue jeans without a problem, Izumi just stood there. Izumi? Izuku asked as he smoothed out the shirt. As figured, both Izuku and Deku were the exact same size, so the clothes fit as intended. Izumi looked at all of the boys for several long seconds, blinked, and then looked away, her face tinging a slight pink. Can you guys not look? I'm not wearing a bra. Oh, was the unilateral yell from all of the Izukus. Hitomi, and even the cat let out a surprised mew. They all turned around quickly to allow the girl some time to change. It was awkward as they all stood there, their backs to Izumi, as they either looked at the wall or the ceiling. Hal that kept his hands on the sides of his face so he wouldn't accidentally see anything out of the corner of his eye. There was a rustle of clothing, a pause, and a soft before more rustling clothes, a zipper, and finally Izumi spoke up. Okay, everyone turned around and Izumi looked like if Izuku shrunk 5 sizes. His clothes were a little too baggy on her. The shirt, one that said flip-flops, went down to her knees as it hung off of her body. It was so big that the collar dipped down a bit, making it look like a V-neck. "This isn't going to work," she told him, and Deku rubbed the back of his head. "It's not that bad," he tried to say, and Izumi was completely unimpressed as she remained deadpan. She then let go of the jeans Deku gave her, and they fell down around her ankles with a soft thwamp on the ground. Thankfully, the shirt covered all it needed to. "It's not going to work," she told them matter-of-factly while she kept her arms crossed around her chest. "I'll see what I can do later. For now, maybe you can just..." Deku took an almost comically wide step towards her and pulled the pants back up around her and over the shirt. The shirt added a bit more padding, but still wasn't enough to hold the pants up. Thankfully, Vet came in. Here he undid the belt around his pants and handed to Izumi. "The belt is faux leather, so you should just be able to make a new hole for a notch," he told her, and Izumi thankfully took the belt. She put it through the loops and tried to poke a new hole into the belt. As she was doing that, Deku turned towards everyone. "Okay, so, that talk. We should explain our quirks and maybe a bit of our backstories to try and figure things out," Deku inquired as he found a chair and sat down while looking at the others. Vet nodded while he sat on the floor, and the cat stepped into Vet's lap and laid down. Hitomi sat down beside Vet and gently scratched the cat's head. Izumi was still trying to make a hole in the belt. "Who wants to start?" Izuku inquired as he stood beside Izumi and just watched her struggle for a few moments. Deku started. "I guess it's my universe, so I'll start." Nobody had any objections, and he swallowed thickly before starting. "Well, my mother is Inko Midoriya and my father is Hisashi Midoriya. My quirk is called One for All, and it was passed down to me, making me the 9th holder." Now, Deku must have just assumed that the others knew what exactly One for All was and who the 8th holder was. Well, no, of course Hitomi wouldn't know. But Izumi as well as Vet looked completely caught off guard by this news, and Izuku was wondering if he should tell just who the 8th holder was. "One for All, interesting," Vet mumbled while he crossed his arms over his chest and held onto his elbows. "Not only is my father all for one, but that cop I talked to before I was lead here, he asked me if my quirk was One for All. He seemed confused when I told him it wasn't. So how is it? What does it entail?" "I can only assume it's unstable, because when I told the cop my quirk was unstable is when he asked me if it was One for All." "It is, but isn't its power is unmatched, and slowly I'm learning how to use each aspect of it," Deku explained. "I'm only at 25% as it stands. I can create strong puffs of wind, float, use super strength, but not all the way because I'll break my own body, and I can use black whip," he explained, and Izumi's eyes narrowed as the confusion grew on her face. "Oh, mommy has those quirks as well?" Hitomi chirped. Deku nodded at her, signaling that he heard her. It was nice to know. "In all actuality, there really isn't much to tell. I'm in my 2nd year of UA now. My first year was a roller coaster. We've been at war with the Lodge of Villains, and Tamura Shigaraki is All for One's successor. And I know Izuku knows this, but All for One is currently in Tartarus, and he's not my father. He's my enemy, as he wants One for All for his own." Izumi's confusion continued to stay on her face. "I see," Vet mumbled as he thought about it for a few moments. "Anything else?" Deku thought about it and shook his head. "Who's next?" "I guess, since we're almost the same, I can go." Izuku sighed and leaned against a nearby wall. He paused to collect his thoughts for a few seconds, then after a while he finally started. "I was adopted by Shouta Aizawa. So I'm Izuku Aizawa. My brother is Hitoshi Aizawa." It wasn't lost on Deku when he saw Izumi turn away with a sneer. "Shouta Aizawa raised Hitoshi and I since I was 5 and adopted us both at 8 years old. I, like you, Deku, have One for All. It was passed down to me by All Might. The only thing is, when I received One for All, I had no idea that I had Kyujo or All for One. Now that made several of them all sit up a little straighter as Deku's eyes narrowed. "But Kyujo is sentient." "Yeah, then how could you not have known you had him for so long?" Izuku couldn't meet their eyes when he spoke again. "Well, there's a reason why Kyujo acts kinda childish, you see. He is a child. He's only 6 years old in a technical sense. You see, All for One kidnapped me because of the fact that I have All for One. It wouldn't be until later Kyujo came out and Huel." Izuku scratched his hair. "You guys saw how Kyujo can get well. Multiply it by 10. During the time All for One had me, Kyujo was feral. He particularly liked biting people well. During Hitoshi's and our escape, Kyujo nearly came out, and at the time he was going to ruin everything, so I told Hitoshi to brainwash me and make me forget Kyujo, but I worded it wrong and he erased all of my memories." All of their eyes went wide, even Izumi's. "It did the trick. It kept Kyujo at bay for years. Since you were 5, Deku did the math on his fingers, for 9 or 8 years. You see." Izuku looked out the window now, still unable to look them in the eyes. "Hitoshi was fearful of Kyujo. He had every right to be. Kyujo tried to drown him when we were kids. That's how feral Kyujo was. So when Kyujo would show signs of popping up, Hitoshi would erase those memories. Memories of me accidentally taking a quirk. Memories of me burning myself because his body wasn't used to such a quirk, and so on. It we're working through it," Izuku decided on saying while he crossed his arms over his chest. "Trust me. We're trying to rebuild our relationship. Wow, Izumi whispered. That's vet shook his head. So, I thought I was quirkless for the next 8 years of my life, which is why when Toshinori gave me one for all, it wasn't a big deal. But the stronger one for all got the more and more. Kyujo woke up until eventually he made himself known, and we haven't been able to get rid of him since Izuku's right hand shot out and slapped himself against the Chico. Kyujo. Izuku scolded his quirk. One host, two people, different than Tokoyami and Dark Shadow. Deku observed as he grabbed Izuku's arm and observed him for a moment. This also explains why you have a hard time wrangling Kyujo, and when he takes over once again Izuku's hand shot out. This time Kyujo didn't hit his target as Deku grabbed his wrist and stopped the hand in the air. Nice try, Kyujo. Izuku growled again as he pushed his quirk back. Kyujo wasn't all that amused but didn't speak as he accepted his loss for now. So out of all the names in the world, why name him after a rabid dog? Isn't that a little mean? That inquired. He's named after a rabid dog, Hitomi asked as she knocked her feet together. Izumi nodded. Yeah, you know the movie. Kyujo, it's about a dog that goes rabid and kills people. Hitomi blinked. Oh, I think I know the movie. Yeah, Mom and Dad were watching it a while back. I wasn't interested, it looked too scary. Hitomi shivered at the memory. Izuku chuckled. Regardless, I didn't name Kyujo, Dad did, and it stuck. Kyujo never had a name before and he liked it. Plus, I don't know if you guys know this, the name is kinda fitting. Do not. Izuku yelled to his hand as it threatened to raise on its own. There was a silence before he regained control over his hand again. But yeah, that is my story, all you need to know anyways. Don't you think you should tell them about the facility or even why our tongue is still purple? Kyujo chimed in and Izuku frowned. He didn't want to talk about the facility, the horrors he faced behind those doors. That's all he repeated, not just to them, but to Kyujo. If someone notices why his tongue is purple, then he'll tell them, but for now he'll keep it quiet. Who's next? There was a silence as at first it seemed like nobody wanted to be the next to speak up. Then Izumi raised her hand. Before I go, I just have one question. Who in the world is all for one? It was like she had just asked, how do you breathe? By the horror-struck faces, even the cat was giving her a disbelieving face. Hell, even Hitomi looked unbelieving at her. How do you not know? Deku inquired in a soft voice, and Izumi only shrugged. Like, I understand from context clues he's a villain, but she trailed off and it was Deku that filled in the blanks for her. In my world, he's the most feared villain and he's trying to get his hands on one for all. He wounded All Might in an attempt to get his hands on one for all and killed 6 out of the 9 holders. He has the ability to take quirks and hand them out at will. Izumi listened to Deku's words before her eyes went from him to Izuku. Then you also have that ability. Or at least Kyujo does. We both do. Kyujo is an emitter, but he's also his own quirk with his own abilities. However, we can stop one another from doing something if we wish. Example, Toshinori wanted one for all back after it came out. I was all for one's son. I was prepared to give it to him, but Kyujo stopped me. Incredible, Izumi whispered before she scratched the back of her head. But like us, he's different in each world. I've never heard of him before. Now then again, I'm not in the hero course. Oh? Deku asked with a raised eyebrow. Support course. Janet, she frowned. I'm the only one in this room that's quirkless. Deku patted her shoulder. I understand. You see, if it wasn't for one for all, I'd also be quirkless, so don't feel left out. This didn't really make her feel much better. I was quirkless in my world before Ma started, and Deku nodded towards him, paused and turned. Did you just talk? Oh, right. Deku was out of the room for that revelation. And Moss reintroduced himself. I used to be Izuku Midoriya, but not anymore. Moss looked away, his ears going flat against his head. Like I said, I used to be quirkless. Used to be quirkless before what? Izuku inquired while he brushed some of his undercut out of his eyes. I died, you see. I jumped. The air became heavy. It was like every single one of them. Even Hitomi knew what he was alluding to. I tried. Izumi sat down on the ground and kept her gaze on the intricate patterns in the floor. You see, I found out I was part of a bet, and it was just the tipping point for me. I was tired and miserable, and she shook her head. A bet? At UA? Izuku inquired softly, and Izumi nodded. I was a bet. They called me untouchable because of my lack of a quirk, and I wasn't the only one either. They used points for every girl they dated. With those points, they could make the others buy them something. The guy was so sweet, and Izumi made a disgusted face as she turned away. I liked him. I actually liked him. And that's what hurts. She paused and sucked in a big deep breath to calm herself down. Regardless, that's my sad little story. I guess in the end I got the last laugh. The guy is alone, and I now have a boyfriend that actually likes me and doesn't want to use me. I'm trying to get into the hero course if I can. The others nodded and offered some form of sympathy in their faces. Okay, well, what about you? Deku looked at Moss. What's your story? Well, Moss shook head like he was shaking something out of his ears. As I said, I used to be Izuku Midoriya. After I jumped, however, I woke up only as a cat, not as this cat. I was a solid green cat. Well, Izuku vet, you aren't alone. All for One was also my father, only he upped his crazy. After I died, he resurrected my body into a Namu to try and replicate me. The Namu, we called him Nice was crazy, you see. Itoshi Shinsu is my best friend and owner. Again, it was not lost on Deku when Izumi made a disgusted face at this. Eyes, and I had a connection. I think it was because he had my old body. You see, he was able to see things through my eyes, and he got it in his head that he and Hitoshi were best friends. He kidnapped Hitoshi and took his quirk for his own. Eyes also got a taste of my BLD. He had Toga's quirk as my father gave it to him. He was able to replicate my quirk, but only for a short period of time. So he wanted me, he wanted my quirk to feel alive again. My quirk is the quirk of rebirth. I always come back, always. However, at the time I had a healing quirk. When I finally gave myself up to him, he took a quirk, the healing quirk, and I lost that body. Nice was then killed when he fell off of roof of a building. Still, I came back as a cat. I like being a cat for the time being. Moss explained. Incredible vet whispered, did Hitoshi ever get his quirk back in your world? Moss nodded, yeah, and he was also given wings, so he can fly as well. Wow, daddy with a set of wings. That sounds so cool. Hitomi yelled in excitement at the idea. Moss nodded, it really is also. He's your father in your world. Hitomi nodded happily.